Hey guys, tonight we step straight into the twilight of a medieval town where the daylight has slipped away and left behind a patchwork of shadowy streets, sputtering torches, and the unmistakable clatter of wooden shoes against cobblestones. The air is cool and thick with smoke from a dozen hearths, and as you wander through the lanes, you quickly realize that the medieval night is anything but silent. People murmur in doorways, stray dogs bark from alleys, and somewhere nearby, a lute plays just off-key. You probably won't survive this night if you stumble into the wrong tavern fight, but don't worry, tonight you're here only as a dreamer. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice about the medieval street after dark is that light itself is a luxury. Torches nailed to wooden posts sputter and throw uneven circles of glow, leaving patches of thick blackness just a few steps away. Lanterns swing from hooks outside wealthy homes, but most of the town lives in shadow. You pass a man carrying a pitch torch, its flame licking the night air, dripping resin and smoke as he mutters about getting home before the curfew bell. In many towns, the gates are locked at night, and watchmen patrol the streets, suspicious of anyone wandering too freely. You feel their eyes on you as you shuffle along, pretending you have important business and not just a desire for midnight bread. What really surprises you is how alive these streets are, even when they're meant to be asleep. There's the gossip of women tossing dirty water out of an upstairs window, hopeful. Lean not onto your head. There are pigs, yes, actual pigs, rooting in the rubbish heaps along the street, snorting with the confidence of creatures who know they are untouchable until feast day. You catch the sour reek of ale gone bad, mixed with the sharper sting of tallow smoke, and it's enough to make your nose wrinkle. Historians still argue whether medieval towns were truly as filthy as we imagine, but one step into this alley convinces you that sanitation wasn't winning any awards. You come across a knot of apprentices lounging near a workshop door, laughing too loudly and daring each other to race barefoot across the slick stones. One boy slips, and the whole group roars with delight. Youthful antics are timeless. Even in the 14th century, boys found ways to irritate the neighbors. The quirky detail here? Some records tell us that apprentices weren't just workers, they doubled as impromptu street guards for their masters, sometimes picking fights with rival trades. Imagine your part-time job at the coffee shop also requiring you to form a rowdy street gang on weekends. The watchman rounds the corner and instantly the laughter dies. He carries a halberd that gleams faintly in the torchlight, and his hooded eyes scan you with suspicion. In some towns, being out after dark without a reason could land you in a holding cell, at least until you bribed your way out. You mumble something about delivering herbs to a sick aunt, an excuse good enough for a weary guard who's heard every lie before. He snorts, waves you on, and resumes his slow patrol. Somewhere above, a church bell clangs the hour, echoing like an iron heartbeat across the rooftops. You find yourself edging past a tavern, and through the open shutters spills a chaos of light, laughter, and song. A drunk stumbles outside, tankard in hand, muttering half a prayer and half a curse. He squints at you low. Ike, you're an apparition, before collapsing against the wall. Inside, voices roar to a bawdy ballad about a knight, a donkey, and a very questionable nun. You linger just long enough to smell roasted meat mingled with sour wine and realize how easily a night here could devour your coin, your patience, and possibly your dignity. A more sobering fact: medieval towns did enforce curfews, not just for safety but also to prevent fires. Open flames, wooden homes, and tightly packed streets were a recipe for disaster. Fires spread quickly, and without modern engines, the whole town could be gone by sunrise. So, bells rang, doors locked, and wandering after hours meant you were either trouble or in trouble. Yet, despite the rules, humans are stubborn. Secret meetings, late-night romances, and illicit trades continued under the cover of darkness. As you drift deeper into the quarter, you hear a soft chant. Turning a corner, you find a group of pilgrims huddled around a shrine, candles flickering as they pray for safe travels. The glow lights their faces, casting long shadows on the wall. Some historians claim that these shrines served as both spiritual comfort and practical lampposts, mini oases of safety in a dark city. You pause a moment, letting the murmur of their Latin words soothe your steps before moving on. You notice how sound travels differently here. Without cars, engines, or neon signs, the night amplifies smaller noises, the shuffle of rats, the creak of shutters, the whistle of someone who may or may not be friendly. In the distance, dogs bark in a chain reaction, as though passing secret news across the rooftops. One particularly bold mongrel follows you, tail wagging, until distracted by a pile of refuse. It's a reminder that medieval towns were full of animals, dogs, cats, pigs, goats, all living side by side with people, sometimes more comfortably than the people themselves. A quirky tidbit: some towns kept official pig herders who rounded up these wandering swine each morning, ringing bells to guide them out to pasture. At night, though, the pigs roamed free, fattening themselves on scraps. You step carefully, realizing the cobblestones double as a medieval obstacle course of mud, waste, and hoof prints. Past another corner, you find a storyteller perched on a barrel, spinning a tale for a circle of listeners who pay him with bread crusts or the promise of ale. He waves his arms dramatically, insisting that a dragon once swooped down right here, scorching the roofs. A child gasps, clutching her mother's sleeve. You can't help but smile. Historians still argue whether these tales spread faster than news itself, shaping how people perceived their world. Tonight, gossip and myth hold as much power as law and sword. As the hour deepens, you sense the town shifting toward quiet. Windows shutter, voices fade, and only the occasional clop of hooves interrupts the silence. Somewhere, a rooster crows far too early, confused by a lantern's glow. You pull your cloak tighter, feeling the damp night air cling to your skin, and realize that this dark, imperfect, noisy, smelly world is alive in a way no textbook ever captures. You're not just walking a street, you're weaving through centuries, every sound and smell reminding you how close these people felt to one another, and how close they were to danger. And with that, you take one last glance back down the crooked lane. The torch sputters, a shadow flickers, and the medieval night exhales around you like a living thing. You push on from the dim alley and step into a more open square where the smell of baking bread drifts like a warm blanket through the night air. It pulls you along as surely as a fishing line, because in the medieval world, bread isn't just food, it's survival itself. Everywhere you look, life seems to orbit the humble loaf, from a peasant's coarse barley cake to a lord's snow-white wheat bread that only the richest mouths taste. Tonight, you're about to wander into kitchens, ovens, and taverns where bread rules the table and where beer flows almost like water, because sometimes it literally is safer than water. Your first stop is a small wooden hut, its thatched roof sagging under years of smoke and rain. A single flicker of firelight glows through a crack in the wall. You step inside, ducking low beams, and you're hit with the nutty smell of ground barley mixed with smoke. A woman bends over a clay oven, pulling out flat rounds that look more like thick crackers than fluffy modern loaves. She hands one to a child who gnaws on it with a determination that makes your jaw ache in sympathy. This is the bread of the everyday medieval peasant, dark, heavy, and packed with grains that don't always get fully ground. It keeps you alive but rarely delights you. You take a bite, and your teeth crunch on a stray husk of stone from the mill. Congratulations, you just got an authentic medieval dental experience. The quirky part: some loaves were baked with beans, acorns, or even ground peas when grain ran short. Pea bread might sound healthy, but to medieval folks it was a sign of famine. Historians still argue whether certain famines were worsened by bad harvests alone or by rulers hoarding grain for profit. But for the hungry family at this hearth, the debate doesn't change the fact that dinner tonight is thin and chewy. Moving through the village, you pass a communal oven. Everyone owned a private one, since building and fueling it cost more than most could afford. Instead, families brought their dough to a large public oven tended by the baker. A boy sits nearby, guarding a row of baskets waiting their turn, while the baker sweats in the heat, shoving loaves into the cavernous mouth with a long paddle. Bread isn't just food, it's currency. Bakers were tightly regulated by law, and cheating with underweight loaves could land you in the stocks. You imagine the humiliation of having your bad bread mocked by the whole town as you itch from sitting with your head and hands locked in wood. Across the square, a tavern door creaks open, and a wave of warmth and chatter spills into the street. You step inside and are immediately engulfed in the smell of malt. Ale is everywhere here, frothy, earthy, brewed in barrels stacked along the wall. A man tips his mug in greeting, sloshing half its contents onto the table. Medieval beer is not the crisp lager you know, it's more like a thick, cloudy soup of fermented grain, and yet it's safer to drink than water, which often carried disease. Even children drank small beer, a weaker brew with barely enough alcohol to get a squirrel tipsy. You lean against the wall and watch as a group of labourers pass around a shared loaf and dip chunks into their mugs. Bread and beer, the eternal duo. Without them, the medieval body might simply give up. A fun tidbit: beer wasn't just for peasants. Monks brewed some of the finest ales, perfecting recipes that balanced nourishment with heavenly flavour. Imagine vowing to a life of piety and prayer, only to become famous for inventing the medieval equivalent of craft IPA. You take a sip offered by a friendly brewer, and it hits you with a tang of smoke, sourness, and grit. Not exactly refreshing, but your stomach warms instantly. He tells you about the local ale waif. Tut, a woman who runs her own brewhouse out of her kitchen. Brewing is one of the few trades open to women, and their signs, often broomsticks hung outside, become symbols of their craft. You grin, realizing that centuries later, these broomsticks would accidentally fuel witch stereotypes. So, yes, next Halloween costume might owe a nod to medieval beer culture. Outside again, the streets have quieted, but the smell of bread still lingers, carried by the night breeze. You pass by a wealthier home where servants prepare fine white bread for their lord. This is manchet, made from carefully sifted flour. The texture is soft, the colour pale, and eating it feels like biting into privilege itself. Only the rich could afford it regularly, and even then it was more about showing status than taste. Some nobles preferred darker bread. They thought white looked bland, but serving it proved you could buy the best grain. Social media flexing may be modern, but bread flexing was medieval. As you watch the loaves rise golden in the oven, your mind drifts to the risks of shortages. A bad harvest could turn the entire town into a powder keg. Prices soared and riots erupted when bakers were suspected of hoarding. In fact, bread riots are recorded in multiple towns where hungry crowds demanded fair prices. Historians still argue whether these uprisings were spontaneous or secretly stoked by rival lords, but one thing's clear: bread had the power to topple order. The night air thickens with the sound of bells. Curfew approaches and you duck into a side lane where a woman sits on a stool, pounding herbs with a pestle. She sells spice mixes that make dull bread taste more exciting: garlic, mustard seeds, even imported pepper if you're lucky enough to afford it. The price of pepper in medieval Europe was so high it sometimes got locked away like gold. A single pinch could turn your crust into a statement of wealth. You can't resist stealing a sniff. The pepper makes you sneeze and the woman chuckles, offering you a crumb of flavoured crust. It's the medieval version of free samples at Costco, minus the hairnets. Later you pause under the stars, chewing slowly on your piece of bread. The world feels strangely balanced here. On one hand, bread is rough, humble, often disappointing. On the other, it carries ritual, pride, and the weight of survival. Each crumb ties people to the land, to the harvest, and to each other. You glance back at the bakery where smoke still curls into the night. In the morning, new loaves will appear, fresh and steaming, ready to feed a town that cannot function without them. The distant sound of a rooster calls again, too early, or perhaps it never stopped. You swallow the last bite, your jaw aching from the density, and you realize you've just walked through more history than any textbook paragraph could cover. Here, bread isn't background detail, it's the heartbeat of life, thudding quietly with every loaf pulled from the oven. You shuffle forward from the smoky bakery streets into the looming shadow of a castle, and immediately the night feels heavier. The air smells of damp stone, horse sweat, and wood smoke clinging to the walls. Castles in the medieval world look magnificent from a distance, towers rising above the countryside, banners fluttering in the wind. But the closer you get, the more the reality seeps in. You step through the creaking gate, the iron teeth of the portcullis hanging above your head like a guillotine waiting for its cue, and you're reminded this place isn't just for decoration. It's built for defense, intimidation, and occasionally making you regret leaving the comfort of your straw bed. The first thing you notice inside is how drafty everything feels. Your modern mind expects cozy chambers with roaring fireplaces, but most of the castle is stone corridors where the wind slips in through arrow slits, chilling your fingertips. You tug your cloak tighter as you move past guards slouching on benches, their armor clinking softly, their breath puffing clouds in the cold air. Historians still argue whether castles were more symbolic than practical, but standing here you feel both. A fortress designed to terrify enemies and a chilly, uncomfortable home for those unlucky enough to live inside. The floor beneath your boots is uneven stone, smoothed only by centuries of footsteps. Torches gutter against the walls, hissing with resin, their light catching tapestries that hang like damp blankets. The fabric depicts heroic hunts, noble marriages, and lions that look suspiciously like confused house cats. You trail a finger along the edge and wonder how many nights the lords used these hangings, less as decoration and more as insulation against the cold. Even art had double duty here. As you move deeper into the hall, a door creaks so loudly it could wake the dead. The castle eye is alive with these noises, groaning hinges, squeaky shutters, and the hollow thump of boots echoing through vaulted ceilings. Forget the sleek silence of a palace. This fortress constantly reminds you it's made of wood and stone that flex and shift with weather. You pass a chamber where servants scurry, adjusting shutters to keep out the icy wind. The quirky detail. Some records mention entire families living inside these drafty rooms, sleeping together not just for warmth but because privacy was almost non-existent. Imagine trying to whisper sweet nothings while your cousin snored 2 feet away. Your path takes you into the great hall, where a long wooden table stretches under a blackened beam ceiling. Candles drip wax onto the scarred wood, while smoke curls upward into a haze that blurs the rafters. Here, feasts happen, courts convene, and justice is handed down, sometimes fairly, sometimes theatrically. You sit at the bench for a moment, imagining roasted meats laid out, goblets sloshing with wine, and minstrels playing at the corner. Yet, lean in too close, and you'd notice rats skittering across the rushes scattered on the floor. They crunch under your boots as you shift, proof that glamour always coexisted with grime. A servant passes carrying a bucket, muttering about chamber pots. Yes, castles had toilets. Sort of. The garderobes were vertical shafts leading straight down into cesspits or the moat. Romantic, right? You peek inside one narrow stall and instantly regret it. The draft here is less fresh air and more biohazard alert. Still, for the medieval resident, it was a luxury compared to squatting in the woods. The fringe tidbit, some garderobes doubled as secret escape tunnels. Historians still argue whether lords truly used them in sieges or if that's just hopeful storytelling, but the idea of an armoured knight sneaking out through a latrine makes you chuckle. Upstairs, the private chambers feel slightly warmer. A heavy bed stands against the wall, draped in furs and blankets. You press your hand into the mattress and find it lumpy with straw stuffing, much like the peasants' beds but dressed in finery. Servants sleep curled on the floor or in corners, always nearby in case their lord stirs. You run a finger across the carved bedpost, marvelling at how grandeur still leans on the same basic discomforts. Through a side door you step into the armory. Racks of spears line the walls, shields lean in stacks, and helmets stare at you with hollow eyes. The smell of oil and metal clings heavy. Here lies the promise of defense, though you know from history that castles weren't invincible. Siege engines hurled stones, fire, or worse, disease over these walls. Some sieges lasted months, starving residents until surrender. You picture yourself trapped here during such a time, gnawing stale bread while arrows whistle outside, and suddenly the drafty streets felt welcoming in comparison. But life inside the walls wasn't all war. Servants gossip as they carry jugs of ale down the corridor. Children chase each other with wooden swords, their shrieks bouncing off the walls. A dog trots past, tail wagging, probably fed scraps from the last feast. Castles, for all their imposing design, were also homes. Families celebrated weddings here, held Christmas revels, and even hosted tournaments in the courtyard. You hear echoes of laughter mixed with clanging steel, a strange harmony of joy and preparation for violence. The quirky part. Some castles had built-in murder holes above their gates, openings where defenders could dump boiling water, stones, or even quicklime onto intruders. You glance upward at the ceiling above the entry passage and imagine the panic of being caught beneath it. Yet, day to day, those same passageways echoed mostly wit. The carts hauling firewood and laundry, not invaders. That duality defines the castle. Deadly fortress, drafty house, and oversized status symbol rolled into one. A distant clang startles you. Down in the blacksmith's forge, sparks fly as a hammer strikes glowing iron. The smith pauses, wiping sweat from his brow, then plunges the blade into water with a hiss. Weapons are born here, yes, but so are horseshoes, cooking pots, and hinges that groan in protest every time you open a door. Without constant repair, the castle would collapse under its own weight. You realize medieval life wasn't about static grandeur, it was about endless upkeep, patching holes and keeping fires burning through long winters. As the night deepens, you wander to the battlements. The wind slaps your face as you peer out over the countryside. Below, the faint glow of village fires dots the horizon like stars fallen to earth. Up here, the castle seems to breathe differently. Open sky above, open land below, a view that both empowers and isolates. Guards pace with spears, muttering to each other to keep awake. One yawns so widely you almost hear his jaw pop. He leans on his spear, a reminder that no fortress is stronger than the human endurance behind it. You lean against the cold stone, tracing grooves carved centuries ago. Some are tool marks, others graffiti scratched by bored sentries. Perhaps one lonely guard etched his name here, hoping someone in the future might read it. You whisper it softly, your voice whisked away by the wind. Down in the courtyard, a gate creaks again, the sound echoing like an old sigh. Castles creak because they live. Wood swells with moisture, metal rusts, stones settle and crack. Nothing here is static. Every sound is a reminder that while the castle appears eternal, it's as vulnerable as the people inside. The bell tolls from the chapel tower, a deep sound rolling through the walls. Servants extinguish torches, nobles retreat to their chambers, and silence creeps into the corridors. You find yourself walking alone, boots echoing, the air colder than ever. Behind you, the hall doors groan closed, sealing the warmth inside. Ahead, the draught breathes through arrow slits, carrying the scent of rain. And as you finally step back into the open night, leaving the fortress behind, you realize castles weren't fairy tales carved in stone. They were loud, leaky, stubborn giants, half protection, half prison, and always creaking like the bones of history itself. You leave behind the creaking fortress walls and wander down toward the heart of town, where the first light of dawn finds itself tangled in a maze of stalls, wagons, and shouts. It's market day, and that means chaos, spectacle, and smells that test both your appetite and your patience. Picture a town square crammed with canvas awnings, baskets of vegetables, cages rattling with chickens, and a sea of elbows bumping your ribs. Market day isn't just shopping, it's the medieval version of social media, courtroom, and entertainment district rolled into one noisy, muddy carnival. You arrive just as the vendors finish setting up. A fishmonger slaps his wares onto a wooden plank, scales glittering in the weak sunlight, while his apprentice sprays water over them to keep them looking fresh. The smell hits you like a wet slap, brine mixed with the sour tang of yesterday's catch. A woman next to you wrinkles her nose and mutters that some of those fish probably swam their last stroke 2 summers ago. You edge away, suddenly less hungry. Across the square, a baker hawks hot loaves, steam rising from cracked crusts. Children dart around trying to sneak crumbs while their parents argue over price. Bakers are both admired and mistrusted. Here, admired for keeping people fed, mistrusted because everyone suspects them of using too little flour. The assize of bread laws exist to stop bakers cheating, but somehow every loaf you buy still feels smaller than promised. Historians still argue whether these laws actually protected buyers or just gave officials another excuse to fine merchants. Either way, you clutch your crust a little tighter, savoring the smoky flavor even as your teeth fight against the dense chew. To your left, a group of traveling merchants lay out bright cloth from Flanders, copper pots from the Rhineland, and a curious sack labeled sugar. You poke your nose in and get a whiff of something sweet but grainy. Sugar in the medieval world is rarer than gold for most people, reserved for the rich who sprinkle it like fairy dust over feasts. For peasants, honey is more common, but here in the square, sugar feels almost magical. A merchant offers you a pinch on the tip of his knife. You let it dissolve on your tongue, marveling at the sweetness, and wonder whether you should thank him or accuse him of sorcery. Not far away, a juggler tosses knives into the air, each catch punctuated by a cheer from the gathering crowd. His partner plays a lute, plucking out a tune that's half music, half distraction from the purse-lifting hands sneaking through the crowd. You feel fingers brush your cloak and spin around just in time to glare at a boy no older than 12. He flashes a toothy grin, shrugs, and melts back into the throng. Market days are playgrounds for thieves. If you're not careful, you'll leave with fewer coins than you brought and a headache from arguing about it. You drift toward a stall where a woman in a faded blue gown shouts about her miracle remedies. Her table is cluttered with jars of powders, dried herbs, and a few suspicious vials of glowing liquid. Cures headaches, gout, and unlucky love, she promises, holding up a bottle that smells faintly like vinegar. A man nearby scoffs, muttering that last week she sold him a potion to make his hair grow. Judging by the shine of his bald scalp, it didn't work. Still, desperate customers linger. Medieval medicine is as much about hope as science, and even skeptics sometimes pay for the dream. A quirky detail: some of these so-called medicines included powdered gemstones or dried toads ground up and mixed with wine. You try not to think about what's floating in the glowing liquid the woman waves near your nose. You decline politely, and she glares at you as if you've offended not just her, but the entire apothecary profession. You hurry away before she curses you, or worse, sells you something you can't return. Nearby, a group of butchers set up a makeshift stall, their knives flashing in the sunlight as they slice into carcasses. Blood trickles down the table legs, mixing with sawdust scattered across the cobblestones. The smell of iron fills the air. A child stares wide-eyed until her mother drags her away, muttering about nightmares. But for most townsfolk, this isn't shocking. It's daily life. Fresh meat is prized, though most peasants rarely taste it. Tonight, they'll boil scraps into thin broth, savoring every shred. You pass quickly, telling yourself you're not squeamish. You just don't trust your stomach this early. As the morning grows, the square swells with bodies. Farmers arrive with carts of cabbages, onions, and turnips, shouting about how theirs are fresher than anyone else's. Chickens squawk from baskets, occasionally flapping loose and sending children into gleeful chases. A pig wriggles free of its rope and dashes through the crowd, scattering skirts and knocking over a barrel of apples. The owner curses, chasing after it while the crowd laughs. Medieval slapstick, live and unscripted. You find yourself drawn to the spice merchants, stalls overflowing with cinnamon, cloves, and pepper. The aroma is intoxicating, a swirl of exotic heat carried from distant lands along trade routes that stretch farther than your imagination. These spices cost a fortune, yet the wealthy pay eagerly. Sprinkling cinnamon on your food is like wearing designer sneakers today. It tells everyone you have money to spare. Historians still argue whether the obsession with spices was about taste or status, but as the scent teases your nose, you'd swear it's about both. On the edge of the square, musicians gather to play a faster tune. Flutes, drums, and bagpipes clash in a riot of sound. People start to dance, stomping their feet in the mud. A man twirls his partner, and they both slip, landing in a heap. Laughter erupts, and you can't help chuckling too. These moments of joy break up the grind of daily labor, making market day not just about survival, but about release. For a few hours, people forget their debts, their aching backs, and their lord's taxes. Of course, the market also serves as a stage for justice. In one corner, stocks sit waiting for the unlucky thief or gossip who's crossed the wrong person. A boy points at them nervously while his father explains, "That's where liars go." You wonder whether it's more a lesson in morality or crowd entertainment. Either way, the stocks stand as a reminder. Markets are watched and misbehavior carries a price. As the sun climbs higher, voices grow hoarse, tempers shorter, bargains turn to arguments, and arguments sometimes to fists. You see a fishmonger shouting at a baker about unpaid debts, their fight punctuated by a flying herring that smacks into a bystander's cloak. The crowd roars with laughter and the baker storms off smelling like the sea. Markets were places of trade, yes, but also of endless disputes, and more than one feud began over the weight of onions. You stop for a moment at a small stall selling simple pottery, bowls, jugs, mugs glazed in dull earth tones. The potter, his hands stained with clay, explains how each piece was fired in a smoky kiln. He hands you a cup, warm from the sun, and you trace the uneven rim with your finger. It feels sturdy, built for daily use, not for show. Objects like this rarely make it into history books, yet they carried the weight of ordinary lives more than any jeweled crown. By mid-afternoon, the square is a battlefield of tired merchants, satisfied customers, and trampled mud. The air is thick with the mingled smells of fish, bread, sweat, and smoke. You take one last stroll, your ears buzzing from the sheer volume of voices. A child tugs at your sleeve, begging you to buy a handful of nuts, and you drop a coin into her palm, smiling as she skips away. As the stalls begin to close, you realize how much of medieval life pulses here in the market. Food, trade, gossip, justice, entertainment all collide in one messy, vibrant place. You step back into the narrowing streets, clutching your stale crust and your faint memory of sugar on the tongue, and think, this square is the true beating heart of the town. The square grows quieter behind you as you slip down a narrow lane, your ears still ringing with shouts and laughter from the market. But the hush of evening draws you toward a different sound, the slow toll of church bells rolling across the rooftops. The clang reverberates through stone walls and wooden shutters, a reminder that no matter how much chaos unfolds in the town, the rhythm of life still bends toward religion. Tonight you'll drift through the shadow of the church where faith, superstition, and a fair bit of medieval weirdness mingle into a cocktail as heady as the incense spilling from its doors. The first bell shakes your ribs as you enter the churchyard. Lanterns flicker on the walls, casting halos across carved saints who glare down from niches, their expressions as stern as unpaid tax collectors. Villagers shuffle past you, their boots crunching on gravel, each clutching candles or rosaries. For them, the church isn't just a building, it's the anchor of their entire universe. You feel it too, the way the air hums with reverence like a heavy cloak settling across your shoulders. Inside, the space swallows you whole. The vaulted ceiling stretches upward into shadow, ribs of stone arching like the bones of some colossal beast. Candles flicker in iron candelabras, their wax pooling into stalagmites on the floor. The smell is a layered perfume of smoke, old wood, and the faint tang of incense, half comforting, half suffocating. A priest chants Latin phrases you don't understand, yet somehow they lull your breathing into rhythm. Historians still argue whether ordinary villagers actually understood the liturgy, but that wasn't really the point. It wasn't about comprehension, it was about awe. You kneel on a rough bench, wood worn smooth by centuries of knees, and glance sideways at the people around you. Their faces glow in candlelight, tired mothers' whispers. Ring prayers for sick children, farmers begging for rain or for it to stop raining, apprentices pleading for patience from their masters. Everyone brings their small crisis here, hoping heaven is listening. The quirky detail: some parishioners carve graffiti into the pews, initials, doodles, even dice symbols, proof that medieval minds wandered as much as modern ones. As the chanting fades, the silence presses in. Your eyes drift upward toward a stained glass window glowing faintly with the last blush of daylight. It shows St. George slaying the dragon, his spear plunging into a beast that looks suspiciously like a green cow with wings. You smile at the awkward artistry but then shiver, realizing how real such monsters felt to medieval believers. Dragons weren't fairy tales, they were moral lessons, embodiments of evil that could lurk just beyond the forest edge. You leave the pew and drift toward a side chapel where a woman lights a candle beneath a statue of the Virgin. She mutters a prayer, then touches the stone foot so often caressed it shines smooth. You mimic her gesture, the stone cold under your hand. Here, faith feels tangible. You can see it, touch it, even smell it. Yet right outside these walls, superstition swirls just as strongly. When you step back into the yard, the night air bites your cheeks. A group of villagers whisper around a tree stump where someone has nailed a horse's skull. They murmur about warding off spirits, about keeping witches away from the crops. One man clutches a charm made of braided straw. Another insists his cousin saw a ghost walking the road at midnight. Religion and superstition dance hand in hand here, neither quite eclipsing the other. Historians still argue how much the church tolerated folk practices, but the truth seems clear on the ground. Everyone hedged their bets. You wander toward the graveyard where crooked stones jut from the earth like rotten teeth. Candles flicker at some of the graves, offerings for souls said to wander restlessly. You feel a chill that has nothing to do with weather. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hoots and a child whimpers against her mother's skirts. To live in the Middle Ages is to live always aware of death, plague, famine, war, childbirth. The church offered hope, but superstition offered insurance, however strange. As you stand among the graves, an old man leans close, his breath sour with ale, and tells you of a woman who once returned from the dead. She had been buried too soon, he insists, and clawed her way out on a stormy night. He swears her ghost still lingers. You smile politely, but goosebumps crawl up your arms. You realize this story will be told again and again, feeding fears and reinforcing rituals that mix piety with paranoia. Back inside the church, bells ring again, their vibration shaking the rafters. A procession begins, priests swinging censers, their smoke curling like ghostly snakes. The congregation chants, their voices weaving into a single river of sound. You sway with it, your body rocked by rhythm and repetition. Whether you believe or not, the experience overwhelms you. Even skeptics fall silent before such sensory theatre. When the ceremony ends, the crowd spills back into the street. Some head to taverns, some to bed, but everyone leaves carrying something invisible, a sense of safety, or perhaps just the comfort of habit. You linger at the doorway, looking back one last time. The flickering candles, the stern saints, the faint smell of incense clinging to your cloak. It all feels stitched into you now, like thread in fabric. And yet, as you turn away, the superstitious murmurs return. A woman scatters salt across her threshold. A man carves a protective symbol in tiles. Oh, his barn door, a child whispers to the moon, asking it to guard her sleep. The church bell may mark time, but it's the mix of faith and fear that truly rules the night. You walk slowly down the lane, the echo of bells still in your ears, the shadow of charms still in your mind. Tonight you've witnessed the double heartbeat of the medieval soul, half in the cathedral's grandeur, half in the whispered spells beneath the stars. The church bells fade behind you as you wander toward the training yard outside the castle wall. The clang of metal greets you long before you arrive, steel on steel, echoing like thunder through the crisp air. You step into the yard and see knights practicing in the dim light, their figures bulky and gleaming under the weight of plate and chain. Tonight you'll slide into their world where armor shines like mirrors, but reality feels more like sweat, bruises, and the eternal question of whether you'd rather be roasted inside your helmet or skewered without it. The first knight you notice is strapping on his breastplate, a squire tightening leather straps with the seriousness of a surgeon. The armor glints in torchlight, but as you look closer, you realize it's not nearly as smooth as storybooks suggest. Scratches, dents, and rust freckles cover the metal, each scar a reminder of battle or just clumsy storage in a damp armory. Knights weren't statues, they were walking toolboxes, and like any toolbox, they rattled, squeaked, and occasionally jammed. A squire offers to let you lift a helmet. You grab it with both hands and nearly grunt in surprise. It's heavier than you imagined, and the interior smells like damp cloth and sweat. You slip it over your head for a moment, and the world narrows to a slit of vision. Your breath bounces back at you hot and stale. Romanticized as it may be, wearing armor feels less like becoming a hero and more like climbing into a tin sauna. Historians still argue whether knights spent long hours in full armor or only wore it briefly before battle, but after 5 seconds you're rooting for the only briefly side. Out in the yard, 2 knights square off with blunted swords. They clash with force that rattles your bones even from a distance. Sparks fly where blades scrape. The audience, a mix of squires, servants and curious villagers, cheer. As one knight stumbles backward, the victorious fighter lifts his visor, panting, sweat dripping down his cheeks despite the cool night air. You imagine the medieval version of a boxing match, rowdy, dangerous and probably rigged by side bets. Nearby, a squire adjusts a horse's barding. The animal snorts, clearly unimpressed with its steel caparison. You chuckle, realizing that knights relied heavily on war horses not just for transportation but for intimidation. A fully armoured knight on horseback looked like a walking, neighing tank. Yet quirky tidbits tell us many horses hated the weight and noise, sometimes throwing their riders at the worst possible moment. One chronicler even describes a nobleman's grand entrance ruined when his horse bolted at the sight of a fluttering banner. Heroism has its limits, especially when your steed decides otherwise. A herald enters the yard carrying a long lance. You follow as he sets up a tilt barrier, preparing for a joust. The crowd perks up, sensing spectacle. 2 knights mount their horses, visors down, lances steady. The trumpets blare, and they thunder forward, hooves pounding like war drums. The clash at the barrier is explosive. Wood splinters. One rider sways precariously before regaining his seat. Cheers erupt, coins change hands, and someone yells for a rematch. You can't help grinning, the excitement contagious. Still, you remember the stories. Broken bones, snapped necks, even deaths weren't uncommon. Historians still argue whether jousts were true combat training or more like staged theatre, but either way, you wouldn't bet your life on a lance splintering in the fun direction. After the joust, you wander into the armory again. A blacksmith hammers dents from a breastplate, muttering curses about knights treating armor like cookware. He tells you about the constant upkeep, rust scraping, leather strap repairs. Less polishing. Armor wasn't a one-time purchase, it was a lifestyle. You glance at a row of chainmail shirts hanging like heavy metallic curtains. You lift one, shocked by the weight, pressing into your arms. Imagine walking miles with that draped over your shoulders, plus a helmet, shield, sword, and maybe a lunch if you're lucky. Suddenly your modern gym workout feels like child's play. In a corner of the yard, children mimic the knights with wooden sticks, their armor nothing more than padded tunics stuffed with straw. They shout exaggerated battle cries, collapsing in laughter when one trips over his own feet. The scene makes you smile, but also reminds you that training began young. Boys as young as 7 entered knightly households as pages, running errands and learning manners. By 14 they became squires, serving knights directly, cleaning armor, tending horses and getting the occasional bruise in mock battles. The path to knighthood wasn't all glory. It was years of grunt work and discipline, with the hope that someday, maybe, you'd earn the spurs. As night deepens, the practice winds down. Knights remove helmets, their hair plastered to sweaty foreheads. They gulp from mugs of ale, laughing, their camaraderie shining brighter than their dented steel. Yet you overhear one mutter about the cost of maintaining all this gear. Being a knight wasn't cheap. You needed income from land or noble favor just to afford the upkeep. Without it, you risked slipping into the category of poor knight, forced to rent yourself out as a mercenary. Some did, wandering from war to war, their loyalty tied more to coin than to crown. You picture the contradictions, honor on parchment, but survival in practice. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Not all knights lived up to the chivalric code. While literature praises their gallantry, many were more like heavily armed bullies. Chronicles tell of knights extorting peasants, feuding with neighbors, or showing up drunk to tournaments. Historians still argue whether chivalry was ever a genuine moral system or used fancy PR to make violent men sound noble. As you watch one knight trip over his sword belt and nearly faceplant into the mud, you lean toward the PR theory. The torches burn low, casting long shadows across the yard. You trail a hand along a shield painted with a faded crest. Once it was bright, a symbol of pride. Now it's chipped, dulled by time and blows. Armor, like knights themselves, wasn't invincible. It aged, cracked, and faltered under pressure, and beneath every polished visor was just a human being, sweaty, tired, and praying they wouldn't end up skewered. As you step back toward the street, the sounds of the training yard fade into the night. The clangs and cheers linger in your ears, reminders that knights were more than legends. They were athletes, soldiers, gamblers, sometimes fools, and always weighed down by the reality of their armor, rusty, heavy, and creaking with every move. The romance of knighthood may glitter in books, but out here, under torchlight, it clangs, sweats, and occasionally falls flat on its armored backside. You wander away from the practice yard and follow the trail of laughter and smoke drifting from the castle hall. Tonight the lords are feasting, and you slip through a side door just as servants rush past, balancing platters the size of wagon wheels. The smell hits you first: roasted meat, spiced wine, and the faint tang of sweat from dozens of bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder. This is no quiet supper. This is medieval dining in full swing, loud, chaotic, half-spectacular theatre and half-stomachache waiting to happen. The great hall shimmers with candlelight reflecting off polished goblets. A long trestle table stretches nearly the length of the room, its surface buried under dishes piled higher than your appetite. At the center sits the lord, flanked by family and favored guests, while further down the table lesser nobles and retainers jostle for elbow space. Servants dart between benches, sloshing wine into cups so quickly it spills across the wood, pooling beneath trenchers of bread. You sit cautiously at the lower end, where the food looks less glamorous but still abundant. Before you, a trencher, a thick, stale slab of bread, serves as both plate and sponge. Meat juices soak into it, softening the crust until you can eat the dish itself after the feast. You poke it with a finger and wonder if the medieval dishwasher was simply hunger disguised as practicality. The first course arrives. Roasted boar, its snout still intact, tusks gleaming in the firelight. A servant carves thick slabs, the meat steaming as it falls onto trenchers. The smell is intoxicating, but as you bite in, the grease coats your tongue, richer than anything your stomach can easily manage. Guests cheer, gnawing on bones, tossing scraps to dogs that skitter under the table. Yes, dogs sit at medieval feasts too, weaving between boots, snapping up fallen morsels. One growls as another tries to snatch its bone, and for a moment the barking drowns out the lute music in the corner. The quirky part of dining here is the menu itself. You expect peas, cabbage, maybe bread, but nobles flaunt their wealth with exotic dishes. A servant parades in a pie so large it looks like a barrel with crust. The lid cracks open and, surprise, live birds flutter out, circling the rafters before settling in the beams. Guests laugh, some clapping in delight, others shielding their hair from droppings. You chuckle too, realizing you've just witnessed the medieval version of dinner entertainment, edible performance art. Wine flows freely, but so does ale. Cups never stay empty, though rarely does a guest sip daintily. They gulp, they spill, they laugh with mouths full. Within an hour, the hall grows noisier, conversations layered over one another like clashing instruments. One noble tries to tell a story about hunting deer, but halfway through he loses track and simply shouts for more meat. Another insists his neighbor swap places because he wants a better view of the musicians. Servants roll their eyes discreetly as they refill trenchers. You take a sip of the spiced wine, hot with cinnamon and cloves, and nearly choke at its strength. It warms you instantly, but the sweetness is overwhelming, syrupy against your tongue. Imported spices like this are rare treasures, proof that the lord can afford luxuries most peasants never smell. Historians still argue whether nobles genuinely loved heavily spiced dishes or just used them as status symbols, but your stomach leans toward the symbol explanation. Between courses, minstrels play, their lutes and drums drowned out by laughter and the occasional belch. A jester tumbles into the hall, bells jingling, his face painted with smears of colour. He cracks jokes that make the high table roar, though you suspect most of them are recycled go. Sip about the neighbouring lord's poor hunting skills. Every so often the jester slips in a biting insult, and you glance nervously at the noble's reaction. Fortunately, the wine blunts tempers tonight. Then comes the fish course. Platters of eels, carp, and even a giant pike are laid out, their eyes glazed, their smell powerful enough to make you blink. One dish, a gelatinous stew quivering in its bowl, looks less like food and more like punishment. Still, guests dig in, smacking lips, praising the cook. You force a bite and instantly regret it. The slimy texture makes your throat protest. You wash it down with more wine, wondering how anyone survived these meals without constant indigestion. The truth is, they didn't always. Accounts from the time mention nobles suffering from gout, kidney stones, and stomach ailments. The feast dazzled, but the aftermath often hurt. And then there's the hygiene, or lack thereof. Servants carry basins of water down the table, offering guests a quick rinse of their hands. Towels are shared, passed along, increasingly grimy. Guests pick meat from their teeth with knives, then return to carving without a second thought. Dogs lick bones that are later tossed back onto plates. You try not to think too hard about it, focusing instead on the crackling fire in the hearth. Suddenly, a shout erupts near the high table. A goblet tips, spilling wine across the lord's robe. A servant freezes in terror, eyes wide. For a moment, the hall stills. Then the lord bursts into laughter, waving it off, and the music resumes. But you notice the servant's hand shaking as he retreats, knowing not every mistake ends so mercifully. In other halls, punishment could be swift and brutal. Tonight, fortune spares him. The quirky detail. Some feasts included subtleties, elaborate sugar sculptures shaped like castles, ships, or mythical beasts. They were edible in theory, though most were too hard to chew. Instead, they served as decoration conversation pieces to remind everyone of the host's wealth. You spot one now at the far end of the table, a dragon mad, of almond paste, its sugar wings glittering in the candlelight. Guests ooh and ah, though no one dares break off a piece. By the time the final course arrives, sweet tarts, candied fruits, and a jug of warm milk, you feel both stuffed and queasy. Guests lean back, rubbing bellies, some already slumping against their neighbors. The hall reeks of roasted meat, smoke, and sweat. You realize this is the medieval version of overindulgence, a spectacle meant to impress, but also a minefield of discomfort. Historians still argue whether feasts truly reflected everyday noble dining or were rare extravaganzas staged for display. From where you sit, you suspect both. The pageantry, the excess, the sheer noise, it feels designed to remind everyone of power and wealth. Yet behind the glittering sugar dragons and flying birds, you see the cracks, spilled wine, sour fish, and the groans of stomachs already regretting the merriment. As the candles burn low, the hall quiets. Guests drift away, some carried by servants, others staggering on their own legs. The dogs lick the floor clean, while servants begin clearing bones and broken trenchers into baskets. The glamour evaporates, leaving behind the reality, sticky tables, greasy benches, and the faint sound of someone retching outside the door. You step into the cool night air, your ears still ringing with laughter, your mouth dry with too much spice and wine. Behind you, the great hall creaks as doors close, the echoes of feasting fading into the stone. Ahead, the street stretches quiet and dark, a welcome relief after the chaos. You smile faintly, thinking about how even the grandest feast leaves the same outcome: full bellies, aching heads, and stories that grow taller with each retelling. The echoes of laughter and the tang of spiced wine trail off as you wander farther into the town, but soon they're replaced by something heavier, darker, more unsettling. You notice shutters closed tight, doors barred, and whispers rising from behind them. The air itself feels nervous. This is plague time, the shadow that slipped into medieval streets like an uninvited guest and refused to leave. Tonight you drift among those shadows where every cough sparks suspicion and every herbal charm feels like a prayer with leaves. The first sign hits you before you even see a soul. The sharp, bitter stink of smoke mingled with vinegar. Fires burn in braziers at street corners meant to purify the air. Some towns believed thick smoke could drive away pestilence. You cough into your sleeve, eyes watering, and wonder if the cure might be worse than the disease. Historians still argue whether such fumigations did anything beyond choking people out, but you admit it's hard not to cling to whatever promise of safety you can. At the far end of the lane, a red cross is painted across a door. Beneath it, the words, "Lord have mercy on us." The house is sealed. No one enters. No one leaves. You shiver, realizing that entire families were locked inside when one fell ill, trapped with their fate. A neighbor passes quickly, head down, clutching a sprig of rosemary under his nose. The smell of herbs is everywhere. Lavender, sage, even pungent garlic, people hoping strong scents might block the invisible miasma of death. You round a corner and nearly collide with a figure that makes your heart jump. A man cloaked in black, his mask shaped like a bird's beak, strides past. The infamous plague doctor. The beak holds herbs and vinegar-soaked cloth, meant to filter the foul air. His leather gloves creak as he adjusts his cane, which he uses to prod patients from a distance. You step aside, quirky. Ickly, his presence both frightening and oddly comforting. At least someone dares face the sick, even if his cure is mostly superstition. The quirky detail. Some plague doctors filled their beak masks with sweet-smelling flowers, rose petals, carnations, even mint, basically turning themselves into walking potpourri. Inside a dim home, you glimpse a family gathered around a bed. A child coughs weakly, her face pale, while her mother sprinkles holy water and mutters a prayer. A charm hangs above the doorway, a pouch filled with salt and ashes. The father fans smoke from burning juniper across the room. You hesitate at the threshold, wanting to comfort them, but knowing history has no easy remedies here. Scholars still argue about the plague's exact origins and spread. Rats, fleas, or even person-to-person contagion. But in this home, debate doesn't matter. Hope is all they have. You slip back outside where fear permeates even casual conversation. Two women whisper about the neighbor's sudden death, crossing themselves repeatedly. A man insists the stars foretold this calamity, pointing at the night sky. Astrologers sold charts promising explanations, while priests preached that sin had angered God. Some towns organized processions of flagellants, men whipping themselves bloody through the streets, begging for mercy. You imagine the sight, torches lighting their bent backs, whips cracking, the crowd murmuring prayers through tears. Faith and fear tangled so tightly that even silence seemed dangerous. Yet survival instincts take strange forms. In one alley, a group of youths laugh as they dance, clutching mugs of ale. "Eat, drink, be merry," one shouts, "for tomorrow we die." You shake your head, but part of you understands. When death hovers at every doorstep, why not drown the dread in song? The medieval world oscillated between grim piety and reckless revelry, each a dawn. Front mask for the same terror. The town watch passes, their torches throwing harsh light on shuttered doors. They enforce curfews meant to contain the sick, though often too late. Behind one wall you hear muffled sobs, someone begging to be let out. You quicken your pace, unwilling to linger. The cruelty of quarantine wasn't malicious so much as desperate, but for those inside, desperation feels the same as doom. You wander toward the edge of town where shallow graves gape in the earth. The cemetery has overflowed and now mass pits swallow the dead. A priest stands nearby, his voice hoarse as he chants blessings over each cartload of bodies. Gravediggers work silently, their faces wrapped in cloth. The torches flicker over pale limbs, hastily covered. You step back, stomach twisting, and realize how fragile life feels when measured by the depth of a trench. And yet, even here, you find resilience. A woman kneels at the edge of a pit, placing a sprig of rosemary on the mound. She whispers a lullaby, her voice steady despite the tears streaking her cheeks. Another villager brings bread and cheese to the gravediggers, ensuring they don't starve while laboring. Acts of kindness flicker in the darkness, small flames refusing to be snuffed out. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some believed rubbing onions or even chopped up snakes on the skin could drive out the plague. Others wore charms made of dried toads. One chronicler even claimed rubbing oneself with chicken feathers worked, though you suspect that remedy just left patients itchy and unpopular at parties. Historians still argue whether these practices were truly superstition or early attempts at folk medicine. Either way, you're glad you don't smell of onions tonight. As the bells toll again, you retreat into a quieter lane. The air feels heavy, the silence punctuated by the distant rattle of cartwheels. Yet here, you notice children playing with wassuas, ag dolls giggling despite the shadows. Life, stubborn and resilient, insists on breaking through. Even in plague times, laughter finds a crack in the wall. You lean against a wooden post, pulling your cloak tight, and let the sounds of the night settle. The chanting priest, the cough behind a shutter, the laughter of children, fear, grief, defiance, joy, all breathing side by side. That's the truth of plague shadows. It wasn't just death, it was the stubborn refusal of life to vanish even when the world tried to smother it. And so you step forward, carrying the mingled scents of smoke, herbs and sorrow with you, your path lit by torchlight and memory. Behind you the plague still whispers. Ahead other stories wait, just as alive, just as fragile. You leave the pits of plague behind, but the streets don't feel much lighter. Whispers follow you, whispers that slip under doors and coil around alleys, whispers about things less visible than rats or fleas. Tonight you drift through the murmurs of witchcraft, those secret practices, charms and fears that haunt the medieval imagination. The air itself feels thick, as though every flicker of a candle hides something watching, waiting. The first voice you overhear comes from a midwife crouched beside a doorway, murmuring over a bundle of herbs. She ties them with red thread, tucks them beneath a new mother's pillow, and warns her husband not to remove them for 7 nights. To her, it's medicine. To some villagers, it's suspicious. You realize how fragile reputations were. A healer could be praised for saving a life 1 week and accused of witchcraft the next. Historians still argue whether most accusations came from genuine fear or petty neighborly grudges, but as you watch the man's nervous glance, you sense both could be true. Further along, you pass a group of children drawing symbols in the dirt. One girl carves a 5-pointed star, and the others gasp, glancing nervously around. She giggles, erases it with her foot, and insists she was only copying her grandmother's sewing pattern. The line between innocent play and dark suspicion blurs quickly here. You remember that in many villages, superstitions traveled faster than truth, and a careless game could stain a family's name for years. The scent of smoke guides you toward a small hut at the town's edge. Inside, shelves sag under jars of dried plants, bundles of lavender and bottles of cloudy liquid. The healer, an elderly woman with gnarled fingers, offers remedies for headaches, fevers, even love spells. She hands you a vial of rose water and winks, claiming it makes stubborn hearts soften. The room is cozy, warm with the crackle of the hearth, and yet you know her comfort is fragile. Too much success, too much mystery, and she risks being called witch instead of healer, the quirky detail. Some women deliberately exaggerated their mysterious reputations, leaning into the fear to command higher prices. You wonder if her wink was more business than magic. Stepping back into the night, you hear a different kind of voice, a preacher shouting about sin. His sermon rattles through the square, warning that witches consort with demons, that charms are dangerous, that only the church protects souls. Villagers listen with wide eyes, nodding, clutching rosaries. You catch the nervous glance of a woman with herbs tucked into her apron. In this world, faith and fear are inseparable, and accusations can flare like sparks. Still, not all whispers carry fear. In the tavern, you overhear men boasting about charms that keep their ale fresh, or wives who predict storms by watching the way cats groom themselves. One laughs about a neighbor who swears by hanging horseshoes above his door, convinced it drives away spirits. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly believed in witchcraft or simply wove superstition into daily habit. But sitting here, listening to their laughter, you realize it was both. Belief could be deadly serious and casually playful, sometimes in the same breath. A traveler at the tavern table tells of a trial he witnessed in another town. A woman was accused of causing her neighbor's cow to dry up. No evidence beyond gossip, yet the villagers demanded justice. She was dunked into the river, bound and weighted. If she floated, guilty. If she sank, innocent. But drowned, you shiver, bile rising in your throat. The crowd at the tavern shakes their heads, some appalled, others muttering it served her right. You sip your ale and say nothing, torn between disbeliefs and grim acceptance. You step back outside, needing air. The moon glows behind drifting clouds, casting pale light over the cobblestones. A group of youths huddle around a fire, tossing herbs into the flames, giggling as sparks fly. They chant nonsense words, daring one another to summon spirits. It's half game, half ritual. You laugh softly at their theatrics, but then one boy insists he saw a shadow move across the wall. The group scatters, squealing, and you can't help but glance over your shoulder too. In this town, even jokes have sharp edges. As you wander, you recall a quirky tidbit. In some places, animals were put on trial for witchcraft. Pigs accused of attacking children, cats blamed for illness, even roosters charged for laying eggs. Impossible, but terrifying nonetheless. Entire communities gathered to witness the sentencing of these creatures. Absurd to modern eyes, but to medieval minds, justice had to account for all things, natural and supernatural alike. You imagine the courtroom filled with solemn faces judging a bewildered chicken and shake your head at the thought. You turn into another lane and hear hushed voices through a crack in a shutter. A man accuses his neighbor of bewitching his crops, claiming no other explanation fits. The neighbor protests, swearing innocence. The argument rises, then quiets as someone hisses that the watchman might hear. You slip away before being drawn in, but the tension lingers. One false step, one poor harvest, one untimely death, and suspicion could land like a noose. Historians still argue whether witch hunts in the Middle Ages were as widespread as later centuries, but fear certainly brewed here. For some, blaming witches made sense of misfortune. For others, it was a convenient weapon against rivals. The line between faith, superstition, and politics blurred like ink in water. You pause outside the town boundary, where a small grove of trees rustles in the night wind. Here, villagers sometimes leave offerings, bread, milk, even coins for unseen spirits. A candle flickers at the base of one tree, the flame trembling. You crouch, feeling the hush of the grove, and realize how old these practices are. Older than the church, older than the town itself. People crave protection, and when none is certain, they'll seek it wherever shadows gather. As you step back toward the street, you notice how quiet everything has grown. Even the dogs don't bark. The air is heavy with expectation, as though the night itself listens. You feel a tingle at the back of your neck, half nerves, half imagination. Perhaps it's the memory of the midwife's wink, or the preacher's warning, or the children's startled screams. Perhaps it's just the way superstition seeps into your bones when the moon is bright and the world is too quiet. You quicken your pace, eager for the next lantern glow, the next sound of human chatter. Witchcraft may be whispers, but whispers can weigh heavier than truth. Tonight you've walked through them, tasted their power, and learned how easily a story becomes a spell. The whispers of charms and curses fade behind you as you wander into a quieter part of the town. The noise of taverns and markets softens until the only sound is your own footsteps crunching against uneven cobblestones. Your body aches, and suddenly the thought of a bed, any bed, becomes irresistible. Tonight you get a front row seat to the medieval version of bedtime luxury. Straw mattresses, communal sleeping, and the occasional livestock snuggled a little too close for comfort. You duck into a modest wooden house, the kind owned by a reasonably well-off craftsman. The hearth glows faintly, casting orange light across the room. In the corner sits the bed, or rather, a wooden frame stuffed with straw and covered by a rough wool blanket. It doesn't look like much, but after a day of muddy roads and market chaos, it feels like heaven. You lower yourself carefully, testing the mattress. The straw crunches under your weight, shifting in uneven lumps. Within seconds, you discover a sharp stalk poking your side. You shuffle, then another stalk scratches your calf. You laugh softly. Welcome to medieval comfort. The quirky truth: straw mattresses often doubled as hotels for fleas, lice, and bedbugs. You scratch your arm reflexively, half convinced something just crawled across it. Some households changed the straw yearly, usually at harvest time, while others kept it until the smell became unbearable. Imagine your modern mattress turning into compost, and you'll have the idea. Historians still argue whether these beds were truly unbearable or just another normal hardship, but after 5 minutes on this crunchy cushion, you'd vote for unbearable. Still, there's a charm to it. The blanket, though scratchy, holds the earthy smell of lanolin from the sheep it once belonged to. The wooden bed frame creaks, but feels sturdy. Above you, carved into the beams, are protective symbols, crotums, saws, and simple geometric patterns meant to keep evil spirits away during the night. Superstition didn't stop at the doorway. It followed people right into their dreams. In wealthier homes, beds could be far grander. You imagine stepping into a noble's chamber, towering bedposts draped with heavy curtains, a feather mattress instead of straw, furs piled thick enough to smother. Servants might sleep on pallets nearby, ready to fetch water or stoke the fire if their master stirred. Privacy was a luxury, and even the richest sleepers were rarely alone. For the rest of the town, sleeping arrangements were far more communal. Families often shared one mattress, children packed in with parents, cousins, and maybe even visiting travelers. Imagine trying to drift into slumber while your uncle snores in your ear and a toddler kicks your ribs. You close your eyes and let yourself drift, but the night in a medieval home is never silent. From the rafters above you hear the scurry of mice. Somewhere outside, a rooster mistakes the moon for dawn and crows far too early. A cow lows in the yard, restless. The house itself creaks as the wind nudges its beams. You realize that sleep was rarely the peaceful escape we imagine. It was a constant negotiation with sound, smell, and proximity. And then there's the fire in the hearth. The last embers glow, casting dim light across the room. Families kept fires smouldering through the night to ward off cold, but with that came risk. Sparks leaping onto straw floors could spell disaster. More than one medieval home went up in flames while its residents slept. To guard against that, some people whispered prayers before bed, asking saints to protect their dreams and their rafters from fire. You murmur one yourself, just in case. Half asleep, you remember a curious tidbit. Medieval people often experienced segmented sleep. Instead of one low, stretch, they drifted off for a first sleep, woke around midnight to pray, chat, or even visit neighbors, then went back for a second sleep. The quiet midnight hours belonged to reflection, whispered gossip, or sometimes secret mischief. Historians still argue whether this pattern was universal or just common, but you can picture it easily. Someone stirs beside you, groans, then gets up to check the fire. A neighbor knocks, trading news, while the rest of the family snores. Sleep was less private, less linear, more stitched into daily life like everything else. You toss slightly on the straw and think about traveling peasants who often had no bed at all. They rolled in cloaks beside the hearth of a friendly home, or if unlucky, under hedgerows in the fields. Inns existed, yes, but they weren't the cozy roadside havens you might picture. Some were crowded rooms where strangers shared mattresses, their valuables tucked under their heads in hopes no one stole them. A wanderer once wrote that he awoke with not only his purse missing, but his boots as well. Sleeping, in medieval terms, was always a gamble. Back in the craftsman's home, the family begins to settle. Children giggle as they climb into the bed frame, jostling for the warmest spot. The father mutters for silence, though his snores begin moments later, louder than the rooster. The mother tucks in the blanket, whispering a prayer over her children. Even the dog curls into a corner, sighing heavily as it claims its share of the warmth. You wriggle in your spot, squished but oddly comforted by the press of bodies. Outside, the town quiets. The watchman calls the hour, his voice thin against the wind. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howls, though perhaps it's just a particularly cranky dog. The stars gleam through the cracks in the shutter, sharp and cold. You breathe in the scent of straw, lanolin, and wood smoke, letting it mingle with your thoughts. A quirky story lingers in your mind. Some nobles worried about demons sitting on their chests as the utans slept, causing nightmares. They called them incubi or succubi. To ward them off, people carved charms above their beds or kept relics close at hand. Even ordinary folk muttered prayers against night hags who supposedly pressed on sleepers' lungs. You shift uncomfortably, wondering if that tickle on your chest is a flea or something more sinister. Still, the weight of exhaustion drags your eyes shut. You drift into that strange liminal zone, half asleep, half awake. The bed creaks as someone rolls over. A child mutters nonsense in a dream. For a moment you swear you hear whispers, perhaps from outside, perhaps only your imagination. Night in a medieval town is never wholly safe, never wholly silent, but always deeply human. And so you let yourself surrender to the scratchy comfort of straw, to the warmth of bodies pressed close, to the strange intimacy of a world where privacy is rare, but companionship is constant. Sleep here may be imperfect, lumpy and itchy, but it is shared, and somehow that makes it enough. The itch of straw and the muffled snores of your companions still cling to you as dawn nudges you awake. But today there's no time for markets or bread or even quiet prayers. The rumble of war drums pulls you to the edge of town. You feel it before you hear it, a vibration running through the ground, as though the earth itself braces for something heavy. When the first deep boom echoes from the distance, the townsfolk freeze, exchanging anxious glances. Tonight you will follow that sound, walk among soldiers, and feel how medieval war lurks like a storm, loud, distant, and impossible to ignore. You step outside, the chill air cutting through your cloak, and see banners unfurling on the horizon. Bright colors snap in the wind, crests of lions, crosses, and strange geometric shapes painted boldly to announce who claims authority. Soldiers march behind them, rows of spears glinting like a metallic forest. Boots pound the earth in rhythm, rattling wooden shutters as the army passes. Children run to the roadside, half curious, half terrified, clutching their mothers' skirts. You stand with them, caught between awe and dread. The first soldiers you see are mercenaries, their mismatched armor and ragged cloaks betraying a life of wandering for coin. They grin at the crowd, some winking at girls, others snatching bread from baskets without asking. They swagger because they can. The presence of weapons gives them authority, at least for now. Historians still argue whether mercenaries brought more protection or more chaos to medieval lands. But watching one swipe an apple while the baker protests, you're tempted to vote for chaos. Behind them march local levies, farmers and townsmen pressed into service. Their weapons little more than sharpened poles or rusty swords. Their boots don't strike the same confident rhythm, instead they shuffle nervously, clutching shields that look suspiciously like repurposed doors. You meet the eyes of one young man, his face pale, jaw clenched. He looks more like a boy than a soldier. You give him a nod of encouragement, though you doubt he notices. For every knight in gleaming armor, there are 10 of these weary souls, fighting not for glory but because they were told to. And then come the knights themselves. Horses clomp in heavy caparisons, riders sitting tall, their armor polished until it blinds in the morning sun. Lances rise like a forest of spears, shields painted with heraldry bright enough to burn into your memory. The townsfolk gasp, children point, and for a moment even you feel the swell of admiration. These men look invincible, like living statues of iron, but you remember last night's creaking hinges and sweaty visors. You know what hides under all that shine: sweat, nerves, and the hope their horses don't bolt. The drums pound again and the army halts at the field outside the town. You follow cautiously, watching as tents rise like mushrooms across the grass. Smoke from campfires curls into the sky. Soldiers unload carts of bread, barrels of ale, and bundles of arrows. War, you realize, is as much about logistics as battle. Without food and firewood, even the strongest knight becomes useless. A soldier yells at an apprentice for spilling grain, and the boy looks ready to cry. You step back, sensing how tension hums through the camp. At the edge of the field, a blacksmith hammers on a portable anvil, repairing dented helmets. Sparks fly, ringing in your ears with each strike. Nearby, a group of archers test their longbows, drawing strings until they creak. The arrows fly into straw targets with a thud that makes you wince. One archer grins at you, boasting that his bow can pierce armor at 200 yards. Historians still argue just how effective the longbow was against knights, but Woxotomot. Those arrows bury themselves deep. You're not eager to stand on the receiving end. You wander into the soldiers' tents. Inside, men dice on a blanket, cursing when the pieces tumble wrong. Another sharpens his dagger with grim focus. A third hums a tune, mending his boot with a needle borrowed from a camp follower. War may seem like endless clashing steel, but in truth most of it is waiting. Hours, days, sometimes weeks of boredom, punctuated by minutes of terror. You feel it in the air now. The lull before the storm. The quirky detail: Not all camp followers were soldiers' wives or cooks. Some sold charms promising invincibility in battle or protection from arrows. One woman waves a pouch of dried herbs at you, insisting it makes steel glance off skin. You smile politely but tuck your cloak tighter. In times of fear, superstition sells as quickly as bread. As dusk falls, the camp grows restless. Fires crackle, casting red light over sharpening blades and anxious faces. A priest moves from group to group, blessing soldiers with holy water, urging them to confess before morning. His voice rises over the crackle of flames. God is with you. Fear not the enemy. You hear murmured prayers in return, some sincere, others whispered through clenched teeth. Faith becomes both shield and sword here, wielded as fiercely as steel. And then the drums sound again, louder, closer. Scouts rush back with news. The enemy is near. The camp erupts in motion. Horses whinny, soldiers grab weapons, knights mount up. The air thickens with sweat, smoke, and adrenaline. You find yourself swept toward the field where banners rise once more against the darkening sky. The armies face each other now across the plain, torches flaring. You can barely see the enemy, just a shadowy line of spears and banners in the distance. The silence between drumbeats stretches taut, snapping finally with the blare of trumpets. Soldiers shout, horses rear, and suddenly the ground shakes as the first ranks surge forward. The noise slams into you, metal crashing, men yelling, arrows whistling overhead. You duck instinctively, though none aim for you. Chaos unfolds. Arrows rain like deadly hail. Spears clash. Shields splinter. Horses scream. You catch glimpses of individual moments. A knight thrown from his saddle. A levy clutching his bleeding arm. An archer laughing wildly as his arrow finds its mark. It's too much. Too fast. Battle looks nothing like the orderly tapestries. It's mud, blood, and confusion. You retreat slightly, heart pounding, and realize how fragile armies are. One moment of panic, one gap in the line, and order crumbles. Historians still argue whether medieval battles were decided by tactics, brute force, or sheer luck. Watching the chaos before you, you'd argue luck had the loudest voice. Night deepens and the fight slows. Both sides retreat to lick wounds, leaving the field scattered with broken weapons and groaning men. Torches bob as stretcher bearers carry the injured back to camp. The moans of the wounded mix with the crackle of fires, a grim chorus under the stars. You kneel briefly beside a young soldier clutching his side, his lips whispering a prayer. You squeeze his hand, though you know no words can bridge his fear. By midnight, the drums are silent. The battlefield smells of iron, sweat, and damp earth. You step carefully through the wreckage, every broken spear and trampled banner telling a story. In the distance, you hear faint laughter, soldiers relieved to be alive tonight, even if tomorrow they face it all again. As you leave the field, you glance back once more. The banners sag, the fires flicker, and the silence feels heavier than the clash. War drums may beat loudly, but their echoes linger long after the last strike, vibrating in your chest, reminding you how close the line lies between order and ruin. The battlefield's echoes still rattle in your chest as you slip back toward town, yet not everyone here fights with swords or arrows. Some fight with herbs, scalpels, and prayers, though whether they heal or harm is anyone's guess. Tonight you find yourself stepping into the dim, smoky world of medieval medicine. Equal parts science, superstition, and sheer improvisation. The first sound that greets you is the low groan of a patient carried into a surgeon's hut on a wooden board. The man clutches his side, blood seeping through a crude bandage. Inside, the air is thick with the stench of sweat, iron, and boiled herbs. Candles flicker against shelves lined with jars, powders, dried roots, even suspicious lumps floating in murky liquid. A surgeon leans over the patient, his apron stained a permanent shade of red. He sets down his bone saw with a thunk that makes you wince. You watch as he unwraps the bandage, examines the wound, and mutters about balancing the humours. The medieval body, according to common belief, was governed by 4 humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Too much of one caused illness. Too little caused another. This patient, the surgeon declares, has an excess of blood. The solution? Bloodletting. You turn pale as he produces a knife. slices the man's arm and lets crimson drip into a bowl. The patient moans faintly, and the surgeon nods with satisfaction. Historians still argue whether bloodletting did more harm than good, but watching the patient's face turn paler by the second, you're not inclined to trust the method. Nearby, a healer mixes herbs in a mortar, pounding rhythmically. She sprinkles dried sage, rosemary, and lavender into boiling water, insisting the steam will chase out fevers. The air smells sharp, almost pleasant, though you suspect the patient would prefer a stronger miracle. Quirky detail: medieval doctors sometimes prescribed ground-up emeralds or powdered unicorn horn, though in reality it was often powdered ivory or bones. Imagine spending your life savings on magic dust, only to discover it's crushed seashells. In one corner of the hut, a barber surgeon sharpens his tools. His job isn't just haircuts, though he'll gladly give one while you wait. He also pulls teeth, lances boils, and sets broken bones. His hands move with surprising steadiness as he ties splints onto a boy's crooked leg. The child cries, but his mother thanks the barber as though he performed sorcery. You recall that barbers displayed striped poles outside their shops, red for blood, white for bandages. Next time you see a modern barber pole, remember, it started as a symbol of surgery. Outside you find a quieter scene. A woman tends to her sick husband with home remedies, onion poultices pressed to his chest, garlic broth steaming at his bedside. She hums a lullaby, soothing him more than the treatment ever could. Household medicine formed the backbone of care for most people. Few could afford physicians, and even if they could, doctors often lived far away. So families turned to gardens, kitchens, and old wisdom passed down through generations. Historians still argue whether these folk cures were superstition or proto-science, but watching the woman's patients, you know they carried at least one true ingredient: love. You move toward the monastery infirmary, where monks care for the sick. The stone halls echo with footsteps and whispered prayers. Herbs hang drying from rafters, mint, fennel, chamomile, filling the air with a soothing scent. A monk offers you a cup of warm ale mixed with honey and thyme, claiming it helps sore throats. You sip cautiously, and to your surprise, it soothes. Monasteries preserved much medical knowledge, copying ancient texts from Greece and Rome. Yet even here, cures were as spiritual as physical. Patients were urged to pray, confess, and repent, since sickness was often seen as punishment for sin. You step into the infirmary hall itself. Rows of straw mattresses line the walls, each occupied by pale figures. Some groan softly, others lie frighteningly still. A monk chants psalms at the far end, his voice echoing like a balm. Candles flicker against stone, casting long shadows over weary faces. You feel the weight of suffering press down, yet also a strange calm, the sense that here at least care is offered without judgment of wealth or status. Yet not all healers inspire trust. In the marketplace you overhear a doctor boasting of his miraculous cure for gout, roasted owl sprinkled with salt, eaten at dawn. Another swears by powdered mummy imported from Egypt. Yes, actual ground-up remains, sold at outrageous prices. You gag at the thought. Quirky detail: some recipes advise drinking fresh animal blood or bathing in wine. It's hard to tell whether desperation or gullibility fueled these cures, probably both. As night deepens, you witness a surgical procedure. A man with an arrow lodged in his shoulder grips the table, teeth clenched around a leather strap. The surgeon pries with iron tongs, sweat dripping down his face as he mutters encouragement. With a sickening pop, the arrow slides free. The patient screams, then slumps unconscious. The surgeon pours wine over the wound. It stings, but it also disinfects. You realize that for all the superstition, some practices edged close to real science. Alcohol, honey, and certain herbs genuinely killed bacteria. Survival was a gamble, but not always a hopeless one. Outside the tent, you breathe deeply, grateful for fresh air. The moon glows overhead, silvering the rooftops. You reflect on the contradictions you've seen: bloodletting beside herbal teas, relics beside ointments, superstition beside observation. Historians still argue whether medieval medicine was ignorance or ingenuity. You think it was both, stumbly. Nang steps toward knowledge taken by people desperate to ease pain, even if their methods sometimes caused more. You pass one last house before leaving the quarter. Inside, a mother cradles her feverish child, whispering promises that he'll recover. A charm dangles from the boy's neck while a bowl of chamomile steams nearby. Faith, magic, and medicine mingle here with no clear border, and in the quiet you realize that healing in the Middle Ages was less about certainty and more about trying, always trying, even when the odds seemed hopeless. With that thought, you step into the night, the smell of herbs and iron still clinging to you, the groans of patients echoing faintly. Behind you, the surgeon sharpens his saw again. Ahead, the town hums with different sounds, music, laughter, the pulse of life that persists even while sickness gnaws at its edges. The sharp tang of herbs and the rasp of the surgeon's saw still echo in your head as you step out into the cooler night air. But tonight, not every sound is groaning or prayers for healing. Some are music drifting like silver threads through shutter cracks and tavern doors. You follow those threads, your body swaying to rhythms before your ears even catch them clearly. Tonight you'll walk through a world where candlelight glimmers against strings and drums, where music binds weary souls together, whether in solemn chapels or rowdy taverns. The first tune rises from a small chapel, its door ajar, light spilling out onto the cobbles. Inside, monks chant in low, steady voices, each note weaving into the next until the hall hums like a living heartbeat. The sound vibrates in your chest, slower and heavier than any tavern jig, but hypnotic all the same. Gregorian chant, they call it. Melodies meant not to entertain, but to lift souls toward heaven. You sit at the threshold, letting the harmony wrap you in a blanket of sound. Historians still argue whether such chants soothed the sick or merely drowned their groans, but to your ears the calm is undeniable. Yet only a few streets away the mood shifts entirely. You duck into a tavern and the music here is anything but solemn. A minstrel plucks at his lute with nimble fingers, tapping his foot against the floorboards to keep time. His companion scrapes a fiddle, slightly out of tune but brimming with energy. The air is thick with the smell of ale and smoke, and the rhythm demands clapping hands and stomping feet. A group of labourers slam their mugs in time, grinning through foamy beards. You find yourself smiling too, the sound tugging your tired body into sway. The quirky detail? Many of these tavern songs are bawdy, filled with jokes about ale, love, or priests who drink more than they pray. One verse you catch involves a donkey, a barrel of beer, and a scandalous nun, though the punchline dissolves into laughter before you piece it together. Some lyrics are so repetitive they feel designed to keep drunks singing long after they've forgotten the words. Yet the joy is genuine. For men and women who toil from dawn to dusk, these moments of shared song are small rebellions against exhaustion. In the corner, a boy bangs a drum, his rhythm uneven but enthusiastic. A woman claps her hands above her head, coaxing the crowd into louder singing. Music here isn't polished, it's alive, messy, imperfect, and deeply human. It fuels laughter but also brawls. Already you see two men arguing about the lyrics, their voices rising over the lute. One slams his mug down, splashing ale across the table. The musicians keep playing as though volume itself will soothe tempers. You slip outside again where the night air rings with softer melodies. A travelling minstrel leans against a wall, plucking a harp no bigger than a lapdog. His voice carries stories, knights on quests, ladies in towers, dragons slain, and fortunes won. The crowd around him listens with wide eyes, dropping coins into his cap. You hear the same tale retold 3 different ways before the night is over. Proof that minstrels were part history teacher, part gossip column, part stand-up comic. Historians still argue how accurate their histories were, but accuracy hardly mattered. What mattered was that people remembered the song long after the details blurred. You wander onward, the streets humming like strings of an unseen instrument. Through a window you glimpse a wealthy home where musicians perform for nobles. Their instruments gleam, lutes, harps, even a pipe organ hauled in pieces and rebuilt within the hall. The melodies here are more refined, polished and careful. Nobles sip wine as they nod along, pretending to catch every nuance. You chuckle softly. Even centuries ago, people attended concerts partly for the music and partly to show off their attendance. Further down, you stumble upon something stranger. A group of villagers gathers around a bonfire, clapping in rhythm as pipes shrill and a drum thuds. Men and women dance in circles, hands linked, feet pounding dirt until dust rises. The tune repeats endlessly, hypnotic, and laughter bubbles from the dancers as though the sound itself feeds their lungs. Children mimic the steps, tripping but eager. You feel your own toes tapping despite yourself. A quirky tidbit: some festivals saw musicians play for days, entire villages whirling in dance until exhaustion toppled them. Music here wasn't leisure, it was lifeblood. But not everyone approved. Preachers sometimes railed against music that wasn't sacred, calling tavern songs sinful distractions. In fact, one sermon warned that dancing feet lead to the devil's door. Still, people danced anyway. Historians still argue whether church officials truly feared music or simply feared losing influence, but the fact remains, sound could stir rebellion as easily as devotion. You pause to listen more carefully to the instruments themselves. The lute twangs like a softer guitar, plucked with skill that disguises its fragility. The recorder whistles, shrill yet sweet. Drums boom low and steady, made of stretched skins that quiver under each strike. Bagpipes wail, their drone filling the air with a sound both mournful and merry. These instruments lack the polish of modern orchestras, but their roughness carries a raw charm. Every squeak and rattle feels alive, like the voice of the town itself. Late into the night, the music softens. You find yourself in a small cottage where a mother hums a lullaby to her child. Her voice is gentle, weaving through the dim room like smoke. The melody is simple, repeating, easy enough for a child to cling to. No instruments, no applause, just one voice against the dark. You feel your eyelids grow heavy, soothed by the intimacy. This, you realize, is music at its most powerful, not in grand halls or drunken taverns, but in quiet rooms where fear eases into sleep. A quirky story drifts back to you. Some believed music itself could heal, that certain melodies balanced the humors of the body. Physicians prescribed songs as readily as herbs. Did it work? Historians still argue, but as you listen to the lullaby, your breath slowing to match its rhythm, you suspect there's truth hidden in the theory. You step back into the cool air, the night almost spent. The streets hum less now, most musicians gone, most taverns quiet. Yet the memory of sound lingers, each note stitched into the fabric of your wandering. Music in the medieval world wasn't background, it was heartbeat. It filled chapels, fueled taverns, carried stories, and soothed nightmares. As you move toward the darker streets, you realize you've carried the melodies with you. They echo in your chest, sometimes solemn, sometimes rowdy, sometimes soft as a mother's whisper. And in their rhythm you feel something bigger than noise. You feel the pulse of lives refusing silence. The melodies still hum in your chest as you leave behind the taverns and chapels. But tonight the air grows sharper, carrying not song, but the clang of hammers and the hiss of bellows. You follow the sound down narrow lanes until you stumble upon the workshops of the guilds, the secretive societies that guarded trades as jealously as kings guarded crowns. Here, the world smells not of incense or ale, but of iron, dye, and sweat. The first workshop you peer into glows red with firelight. A blacksmith leans over his forge, face slick with sweat as sparks leap like fireflies. His hammer strikes rhythmically, each blow shaping a horseshoe on the anvil. You step closer, feeling the blast of heat, the air thick with the scent of hot metal. Apprentices scurry behind him, pumping bellows, fetching water, carrying tools. They move quickly, but not too quickly. An impatient hand near molten iron could end in scars for life. The master doesn't glance up as he works, but when the shoe is finished, he cools it with a hiss and finally notices you. He eyes you suspiciously, muttering about outsiders who'd steal secrets. That's the guild's way. Protect the craft, protect the livelihood. No one becomes a smith overnight, and no one outside the guild learns their tricks easily. The quirky detail. Some guilds even had initiation rituals, complete with oaths and symbolic tasks to ensure loyalty. Imagine pledging secrecy about shoemaking like you're joining a spy network. You wander further and find the weaver's hall. Inside, wooden looms creak as threads shuttle back and forth. Women and men work side by side, their hands flying in practiced motions. The fabric stretches long, a tapestry of wool dyed in muted reds and greens. The air smells of lanolin and dye, sharp enough to sting your nostrils. A young apprentice nods at you shyly, his fingers raw from hours of spinning. His master glances up, protective, reminding you again that guild knowledge isn't freely shared. The walls here are lined with bolts of cloth, some plain, some embroidered with elaborate patterns. These fabrics aren't just clothing, they're currency, proof of wealth and social status. The guild controls prices, quality, and even who gets to sell. You overhear two masters debating angrily about an outsider trying to trade unlicensed cloth. Their voices rise, sharp as scissors. You realize guilds were as much about power as about craft. Outside, the cobbled street bustles with apprentices carrying deliveries. One boy staggers under a barrel of ale brewed by the Guild of Alewives. Another balances a basket of shoes from the cordwainer's hall. Everywhere you look, trade defines life. To be outside a guild is to live on the fringes. To be inside one is to gain protection, but also obligation. Historians still argue whether guilds protected workers or stifled competition. Watching the tight grip of masters on their apprentices, you suspect both. You pause by the tanner's yard, instantly regretting it. The smell slams into you, rotting flesh, urine, and harsh chemicals. Men scrape hides stretched taut across frames, their knives flashing. They soak skins in vats of pungent liquid, then pound them until pliable. Apprentices gag but continue, too terrified to disobey. The work is brutal, but without it, no one would have leather boots, belts, or saddles. You pinch your nose, grateful when you finally move on. The quirky tidbit: tanners were often forced to live outside town walls because of the stench. You laugh softly, imagining medieval zoning laws, bakeries in the center, tanners at the edge, all enforced by the gag reflex. Back in the heart of the guild quarter, you step into the stonemason's lodge. Here, chisels bite into blocks, sending stone dust swirling like powder. Masons shape intricate carvings for cathedrals and castles, each strike of the chisel a blend of strength and artistry. One mason shows you a half-finished gargoyle, its face twisted into a mischievous grin. He winks, admitting he modeled it after a grumpy church official. Humor hides even in stone. Still, he lowers his voice quickly, warning you not to repeat it. The guild protects its own, but it also polices indiscretion. The apprentices here look older, strong enough to heft blocks. They sweat under the weight, their arms trembling, but the masters bark orders until the stone lands in place. To join this guild requires years of back-breaking work, endless practice, and loyalty sealed by oath. Only then might one rise to journeyman, traveling to prove skill before returning as a master. The hierarchy is rigid, the ladder steep. As the night deepens, torches flare across the quarter. The guild halls glow with candlelight, their carved doors locked tight. Inside, masters gather at long tables, drinking ale and debating rules. Minutes of meetings will be kept, fines issued for infractions, and apprenticeships discussed. You press your ear to the wall and hear fragments. 3 pennies fine, unlicensed work. Standards must not slip. The seriousness reminds you of government councils more than craftsmen's clubs. Guilds were politics as much as profession. And yet, camaraderie thrives too. You stumble into a courtyard where apprentices share bread, laughing about burned fingers and ruined dye vats. One boy admits he spilled ink over an entire parchment, ruining a week's work. The others howl with sympathy, sharing similar disasters. Their bonds are forged through exhaustion, blisters, and whispered dreams of someday hanging their own sign outside a workshop. The quirky fact: some apprentices carved secret doodles or initials into hidden corners of their master's work. Tiny rebellions against anonymity. You run your fingers over a beam, smiling when you find faint scratches shaped like a heart. Someone, centuries ago, left proof of existence in the margins of craft. Historians still argue whether guilds slowed progress by keeping secrets or preserved quality by enforcing standards. From what you've seen, the truth is both. Guilds are walls and bridges at once. Barriers to outsiders, lifelines to insiders. They guard knowledge fiercely, but also ensure no craftsman starves alone. As midnight approaches, the workshops quiet, fires die down, tools are set aside, and apprentices curl on straw pallets in corners. Masters lock doors with heavy keys, their secrets safe until dawn. The quarter falls silent except for the echo of your own footsteps. You glance back once more, watching smoke drift from the last dying forge. The guild world is closed to you, but its presence pulses everywhere, in every shoe, every stone, every barrel of ale. Life in the Middle Ages isn't simply built, it's crafted, guarded, and stamped with the seal of a guild. The guild quarter fades behind you, its locked halls and sleeping apprentices leaving only the faint smell of smoke and dye in the air. But another kind of craft drifts through the night, less secretive than stone or steel and far more portable. The words and melodies carried by wandering minstrels. You follow the sound of a pipe down a muddy lane until you stumble upon a circle of travellers huddled around a fire. Their cloaks are patched, their boots worn, but their eyes shine with the restless spark of stories waiting to be told. Tonight you walk with them, letting their tales stitch together the fabric of the medieval imagination. The first minstrel you meet lifts a lute, its wood scratched and its strings slightly frayed, but his fingers dance across it with practiced ease. He sings of a knight who slew a dragon and won a lady's heart, though halfway through the story, the dragon suspiciously resembles his neighbour's goose, and the lady sounds more like a tavern maid. The crowd roars with laughter, mugs of ale sloshing, and you grin too. Historians still argue whether minstrels preserved genuine history or twisted it into parody, but watching this crowd, you realize accuracy hardly mattered. Entertainment did. Beside him, a jongleur juggles apples in the firelight, slipping in jokes between throws. His voice rises, mocking a local lord's bald head, then praising the lord's wife's cooking, an equal balance of flattery and insult to avoid a beating. You catch the nervous laughter of villagers who glance around, making sure no lordly spies lurk nearby. A quirky detail, some minstrels travelled with licenses granted by nobles, while others drifted dangerously, performing wherever they could. Without patronage, their songs earned bread or wrath. Further down the road you hear a different tone. A ballad carries over the wind, slower, mournful. A woman sings of a crusader who left home and never returned, her voice trembling with grief. The audience listens in silence, some wiping tears. These songs serve not only as entertainment but as memory, preserving losses that might otherwise be forgotten. You feel the weight of it, the way music carries emotions too heavy for words alone. At another campfire, a storyteller beats a drum as he recites tales of ancient kings. His rhythm keeps the crowd awake, his voice rising with drama, lowering to a whisper so everyone leans closer. When he finishes, he passes his hat, collecting coins, bread crusts, even a slice of cheese. Payment may not be rich, but it's enough to keep him moving. You realize that minstrels lived on the road itself, trading words for survival. The quirky tidbit, some minstrels were known to exaggerate their adventures so wildly that listeners nicknamed them liars with lutes. Yet people invited them anyway. Gossip wrapped in rhyme felt truer than silence, even if the details bent. You wander with one group as they pack up, heading to the next village. Their instruments jangle as they walk, a travelling orchestra of mismatched pieces, a harp strapped to one man's back, a drum slung over another's shoulder, a bagpipe wheezing occasionally as its owner tests the reeds. They swap verses as they go, each adding lines to a bawdy tune. By the time dawn threatens, the song has ballooned into a half-hour epic involving cows, priests, and a scandalous pie. You laugh until your ribs ache, realizing humour itself was a kind of medicine on the road. Not every minstrel is carefree, though. One leans close to you, whispering about nights spent shivering under hedges, hungry and unwelcome. Villages sometimes chased minstrels away, accusing them of spreading news, lies, or even plague. Their lives teetered between applause and suspicion. You see it in his tired eyes. The road off, earth's freedom, but freedom always comes with hunger. In town squares, minstrels compete with vendors and gossip. You watch one stand on a barrel, strumming furiously to drown out a fishmonger's shouts. His voice booms with a tale of Robin Hood. Yes, even here the outlaw lives in song, though whether he ever lived at all is still debated. Historians argue endlessly about Robin's origins, but to these villagers the story feels truer than truth. They cheer at the mention of rich men robbed and poor men fed, their laughter edged with longing. Later you stumble into a noble's hall where minstrels perform under chandeliers of dripping wax. Their songs are more polished here, full of flattery for the lord and his lineage. A harpist sings of ancestors who supposedly wrestled bears with their bare hands. You hide a smirk, wondering if even the lord believes it. Still, the coins tossed onto the floor are heavy, and the minstrels bow low. For them, the difference between bread crusts and silver depends on how convincingly they stretch a tale. A quirky story emerges. In some courts, minstrels were spies as much as entertainers, carrying news between regions under the guise of performance. Their tongues wagged as freely as their strings. You imagine them slipping rumors into songs, planting seeds of intrigue behind catchy rhymes. Perhaps the ballad of a cowardly knight was really aimed at a specific rival. Perhaps the tale of a lost crusader carried hidden warnings. Words were weapons too, subtle but sharp. As night deepens again, you settle beside a campfire where a minstrel plucks a gentle tune. The flames dance across his weathered face as he sings softly of seasons, love, and roads that never end. The crowd quiets, leaning in, lulled by the rhythm. You feel your own eyelids heavy, soothed not by truth or wit, but by the simple cadence of strings and voice. Historians still argue whether minstrels truly shaped culture or merely reflected it. Sitting here, you know the answer. Both. They mirrored fears, hopes, and laughter, but they also planted ideas, sparking rebellions or comforting grief. They stitched people together with songs, leaving trails of melody across every road they walked. When the fire dies, the minstrels gather their instruments, slinging them over tired shoulders. Tomorrow they'll move on to another village, another hall, another night of applause or suspicion. You rise with them, the memory of their music still vibrating in your bones. The road stretches ahead, endless, but softened by song. The echoes of minstrel laughter fade behind you as your path winds toward an open field on the edge of town. You hear shouts and laughter before you see anything, and then a glow. Torches and bonfires, flames leaping against the night sky. You've stumbled into a medieval festival, the kind that transforms quiet villages into riotous carnivals of fire, masks, and dancing until dawn. Tonight you'll wander through these revels, half sacred, half chaotic, always teetering between devotion and mischief. The first thing that strikes you is the fire itself. A massive bonfire roars at the center of the square, its sparks shooting upward like stars. Villagers toss in branches, even broken furniture, cheering as the flames climb higher. Children dart close, daring each other to jump across smaller fires at the edge. Their laughter rings bright against the crackle of burning wood. Fire here is not just warmth, it's spectacle, ritual, and a touch of danger. A group of masked dancers circle the blaze, their faces hidden by painted wood. Grinning devils, solemn saints, animals with bulging eyes. They leap and spin to the thud of drums, bells jangling at their belts. Some masks look comic, others unsettling, and you realize they blur lines between mockery and reverence. A boy in a goat mask bleats theatrically, making the crowd howl with laughter. A woman in a saint's mask twirls solemnly, then stumbles, nearly toppling into the fire. Applause erupts anyway. Historians still argue whether these festivals began as pagan rituals or Christian feasts reshaped over time. Watching the goat boy and saint twirl side by side, you suspect both are true. The church may call it a holy day, but the villagers clearly see room for jokes, ale, and fire dances in equal measure. Vendors shout from stalls at the festival's edge. You smell roasted meat sizzling on spits, dough fried in bubbling oil, honey cakes dripping with sweetness. You grab a bite of pastry dusted with cinnamon and nearly burn your tongue on the hot filling. It's messy, sticky, utterly delightful. A girl runs past with a turkey leg larger than her head, grinning despite grease smeared across her cheeks. For one night, diets vanish. Food becomes theatre. Near the church steps, a priest watches warily, muttering that the dancing skirts sin. yet even he accepts a sweet cake from a passing child. The quirky detail? Some priests secretly joined the revels after dark, cloaking themselves in masks so no one recognized them. You imagine spotting a bishop disguised as a jester and chuckle at the thought. Music floods the air, flutes shrill, drums pound, bagpipes wail like geese startled from a pond. The sound is raw, chaotic, but irresistible. Couples seize hands, spinning wildly, skirts flaring, boots stomping mud into the earth. You're pulled into the whirl before you protest, spinning until the world blurs. Laughter bubbles from your throat, dizzy and uncontrollable. For a moment you forget war, plague and hunger. You're just one body among many, carried by rhythm and firelight. The quirky tidbit? Some festivals turned competitive, men leaping fires, women balancing jugs on their heads, whole villages racing carts or wrestling pigs. You stumble upon one such contest now, two men straining to climb a greased pole while the crowd jeers and cheers. One slips, landing in the mud to roars of laughter. The other reaches the top, grabbing the prize, an inflated bladder tied like a balloon. He waves it proudly, the absurdity only adding to the triumph. Further on, a troupe of actors sets up a makeshift stage. Their play retells a saint's miracle, though half the audience snickers as devils in red tights trip each other. The line between devotion and parody is thin here. Children shriek with delight when one devil tumbles into a basket of apples, sending them rolling. Historians still argue whether medieval theatre educated or merely entertained. Judging by the crowd's laughter, both seem true. Not all revels are laughter, though. At the edge of the square you hear solemn singing. A procession winds through the crowd, torches held high, voices chanting prayers. They pause at the bonfire, crossing themselves before tossing herbs into the flames. The scent of rosemary and sage drifts upward, a reminder that festivals carried spiritual weight too. You feel the hush settle briefly, only to break moments later when another group of dancers storms in with bells and whistles. Reverence and chaos dance hand in hand. As midnight deepens, the revel grows rowdier. Ale flows like water, spilling across tables. Men challenge each other to drinking contests, slamming mugs until one collapses under the bench. A woman belts out a bawdy song, cheered on by her companions. Arguments flare, fists fly, and the crowd roars approval at every scuffle. You edge back cautiously, realizing how quickly joy tips into mayhem. A quirky note? Some towns hired festival watchmen, whose sole job was to drag drunkards out of fires or break up fights. You spot two men now, hauling a brawler by the arms as he slurs an unfinished song. Yet through the chaos, moments of tenderness shine. Couples sneak away from the noise, slipping behind barns or into quiet corners, whispering promises. A mother cradles her baby, rocking gently to the music, smiling at the sight of neighbors dancing. Old men sit on benches, swapping jokes about festivals past, their eyes glinting with nostalgia. Joy isn't uniform, it spreads in ripples, different shapes for different people. Toward dawn, the fire still blazes, though lower now, embers glowing like rubies. Dancers tire, collapsing into heaps of laughter. Musicians play slower tunes, lullabies for the drunk and weary. A man snores beneath a table, his mug still in hand. Children curl against their mothers, sticky with honey and soot. Even the priest softens, fearing a weary smile at the sight of neighbors bound together by music and flame. Historians still argue whether festivals strengthened communities or encouraged sin. Walking away, you know the answer is both. These nights blurred lines between sacred and profane, order and chaos, laughter and prayer. But in that blur lay something essential: release, a chance for villagers to shed daily burdens even briefly, in firelight and song. As the sun teases the horizon, you glance back one last time. The bonfire smoulders, smoke curling skyward like a fading prayer. The square is littered with overturned mugs, broken masks, and exhausted smiles. You carry the warmth with you, the echo of drums still thudding in your ribs, a reminder that even in the harshest centuries people found time to burn bright.
The festival bonfires smolder behind you, leaving the smell of ash clinging to your cloak and the echo of drums buzzing in your ears. But as you walk toward the quieter lanes of the town, Another sound rises, barks, squawks, and the occasional high-pitched screech that definitely isn't human. Tonight, you'll drift into the strange, delightful, and sometimes disastrous world of medieval pets and beasts, where loyalty, status, and comedy collide in feathers, fur, and claws. The first creature that greets you is a scruffy dog trotting confidently down the street. Its coat is shaggy, its ribs faintly visible, but its eyes gleam with mischief. It pauses to sniff a barrel, then lifts its leg without hesitation. Townsfolk hardly blink. Dogs roam freely here, scavenging scraps and serving as impromptu guardians. You crouch, scratching the dog's head, and it rewards you by licking your hand before bounding off toward the butcher's stall. Dogs were indispensable in the medieval world, companions, hunters, guards, and sometimes warm footrests at night. You remember the quirky tidbit that noblewomen were often painted with tiny lapdogs perched on their laps, symbols of affection and status. Imagine showing off your wealth by displaying not jewels, but a yappy dog. Not far from the dog's trail, you hear the flutter of wings. A falconer stands in the square, his leather glove raised high. Perched on it is a falcon, hooded and eerily still, its talons gripping the glove with quiet menace. The falconer strokes its feathers, murmuring softly, then removes the hood. The bird's eyes snap open, sharp, golden, terrifying. With a cry, it launches into the air, swooping above the crowd before diving back to land neatly on the glove. Children gasp, and one woman clutches her cloak tightly. Falconry was the sport of nobles, both practical and symbolic. Training these predators required patience, skill, and money. Historians still argue whether falconry was truly efficient for hunting or simply an excuse for nobles to flaunt power. But when the bird's wings beat above you, it feels like raw control over nature itself. The quirky part. Manuals of the time claimed each rank of society was entitled to specific birds. A king might fly a gerfalcon, a knight a peregrine, a priest a sparrowhawk. Heaven forbid you fly the wrong bird. You'd be stepping out of your social lane. You imagine a minor noble nervously explaining to his peers why his hawk looks a little too fancy. Further down, a boy leads a goat on a rope, tugging it stubbornly toward home. The goat bleats in protest, yanking back, then darts sideways to nibble on a neighbor's laundry. The boy groans, the crowd laughs, and you can't help chuckling too. Goats and sheep were as much household fixtures as pets, though their companionship often tested patience. In some homes, goats even shared living spaces with families, bleating through the night as though daring you to sleep. Then you spot something more exotic, a nobleman strutting proudly with a chained monkey perched on his shoulder. The creature chitters, grabs the man's hat, and scampers up a nearby awning before tossing the hat into the mud. The crowd bursts into laughter while the noble turns red with fury. Exotic pets were prized as novelties, gifts brought back from faraway lands. Monkeys, parrots, even lions occasionally appeared in noble courts, though most ended poorly. You picture a dinner party disrupted by a parrot shouting obscenities it overheard from drunk squires, and grin. Quirky tidbit? Records describe one nobleman parading a pet bear through town, insisting it dance for entertainment. The bear, unsurprisingly, preferred not to. Back at the tavern door, cats slink in shadows, their eyes gleaming green. They weave between legs, insing on rats foolish enough to show themselves. Cats had a complicated place in medieval life. Some saw them as useful hunters. Others branded them as witches' familiars. Black cats especially carried suspicion. You stroke one, and it arches its back, purring before darting away. The crowd glares, muttering about bad luck, and you realize affection for cats could risk reputation. Historians still argue whether mass killing of cats during the plague worsened the rat problem, but standing here, you suspect the cats weren't thanked nearly enough. A small procession catches your eye. Musicians lead, followed by servants carrying cages of brightly colored birds. Parrots, peacocks, even a swan with wings clipped. Nobles behind them beam proudly, showing off these living jewels. Peacocks strut with shimmering tails, their cries echoing like banshees. The display dazzles, but you know the truth. The birds probably annoy servants endlessly, stealing food and shrieking at dawn. Exotic pets were symbols of wealth, but practicality rarely entered the equation. The quirky note? Some nobles went so far as to gift elephants or camels to monarchs, though few survived long in foreign climates. Chroniclers gush about crowds gawking at such beasts, wide-eyed as though staring at dragons. Imagine stumbling upon an elephant plodding through a cobbled medieval street. It would feel like a fairy tale crashing into your turnip patch. As the night deepens, you wander into a stable. Horses snort softly, their breath misting in the chill air. Unlike monkeys or parrots, these beasts are no novelty. They are the engines of war, trade, and travel. War horses stamp impatiently, their muscles taut even at rest. Smaller cart horses chew hay, eyes gentle. You run a hand along a mane, feeling the warmth beneath the fur. Horses here are partners, not pets, yet affection binds riders and steeds as tightly as reins. You recall chronicles of knights mourning their fallen horses as though they were brothers. The bond runs deep. At the back of the stable, a boy cradles a rabbit, stroking its ears. He glances nervously at you, then smiles shyly. Rabbits served both as pets and meals, sometimes both in the same household. You feel a pang of sympathy, hoping this one avoids the pot at least another day. Pets in the medieval world rarely enjoyed the modern luxury of being just pets. Most had a purpose: to guard, hunt, or feed. Yet companionship still flickered between duties. You step outside again, where dogs bark at shadows, cats prowl, and the falconer's bird circles silently against the moon. The street feels alive with non-human voices, snorts, bleats, hisses, caws, an orchestra of creatures sharing space with people. Life here isn't just human. It's a messy coexistence of species, each shaping the rhythms of daily survival. Historians still argue whether animals in medieval towns were truly loved or merely tolerated. Watching the boy hug his rabbit, the noble curse at his monkey, and the tavern cat curl contentedly in a corner, you know the answer is both. Affection and frustration lived side by side, just as they do now. As you move on, the night air carries a final sound, the howl of dogs outside the walls, wild cousins echoing into the darkness. Domesticated or not, beasts are everywhere here, reminders that the medieval world was never just human. It was shared, scratched, bitten, and chewed, a tapestry woven with paws, claws, wings, and fur. The chorus of howls fades behind you, replaced by the sharp clack of wood against stone. You follow the sound until you step into a square illuminated by torches. Here, the air is heavy with curiosity and shame. A crowd gathers, their eyes fixed on a pair of wooden frames propped at the center, the stocks. Tonight you'll drift among the jeers and whispers, where justice, humiliation, and a hint of comedy collide. The first prisoner you see is a thin man with his head and hands trapped between two beams. His hair hangs lank across his face, but he can't brush it aside. A child throws a crust of stale bread at him, and it bounces off his shoulder. The crowd laughs. Stocks weren't prisons for hardened criminals. They were theaters for everyday mischief. Petty theft, drunken brawls, gossip, cheating waits, punishments that stung more in pride than flesh. You step closer, feeling the odd balance between cruelty and entertainment. A woman in the crowd shouts that he overcharged her for onions. Another insists he insulted the baker's daughter. The man mumbles through clenched teeth, swearing he's innocent. Historians still argue whether stocks served true justice or simply offered communities an outlet for frustration. Looking at the smirking faces, you suspect it was often the latter. Not far away, another offender sits locked in a pillory, similar but harsher. His ankles and wrists are clamped, forcing him into an awkward crouch. His cheeks burn red as neighbors toss mud, eggs, even a fish or two. The stench clings to him, and he squeezes his eyes shut against the onslaught. Yet laughter rises with every splat. Justice here doubles as performance, a chance for the community to release tensions while the unlucky suffer at the center. You overhear a boy whispering that sometimes punishments lasted hours, sometimes days. Prisoners endured sun, rain, or the mockery of Endel. SS passers-by. Some fainted from exhaustion, others joked back at the crowd, earning unexpected cheers. The quirky detail? Clever offenders occasionally paid children to throw soft fruit instead of stones, turning punishment into farce. You smile faintly, imagining a trickster buying his own hecklers. At the edge of the square, you notice constables leaning on their staffs, watching with lazy indifference. They enforce order, but tonight their job is mostly to prevent the crowd from going too far. Too far meant stones that cracked skulls, not just pride. One constable yawns, clearly bored, as though justice were little more than background noise. You walk closer to the pillory and hear whispers of more severe punishments. Stocks and pillories humiliate, but for repeat offenders, flogging or branding might follow. Some even faced mutilation, a missing ear, a branded cheek. Fear kept many in line, but shame was often the first step. Medieval justice loved spectacle as much as severity. In one corner, you see a woman with her tongue clamped in an iron device called a scold's bridle. Neighbors gossip that she spread too many rumors. The mask covers her mouth with metal, forcing silence. Children stare wide-eyed, half horrified, half fascinated. Quirky tidbit? Some bridles included bells, so everyone heard her approach. Imagine being punished not just with silence, but with jingles announcing your disgrace. The square buzzes with mixed emotions: mockery, pity, curiosity. A boy tugs his mother's sleeve, asking why the man is locked up. She answers, so he learns his lesson. Yet her tone wavers, as though she isn't entirely convinced. You realize that punishment often taught communities as much as offenders. It reminded everyone of the thin line between accepted behavior and humiliation. Night deepens, and the crowd thins. The man in the stocks slumps, exhausted, his head drooping. A woman quietly approaches, slipping him a piece of bread. Her kindness contrasts sharply with the earlier jeers. You sense how justice could spark cruelty and compassion side by side. Historians still argue whether stocks truly reduced crime or just satisfied crowds' appetite for drama. Either way, the man munches gratefully, proving survival mattered more than philosophy. Nearby, a jester plays a tune on a pipe, mocking the prisoners with silly rhymes. The crowd chuckles, tossing him coins for his wit. Even punishment becomes entertainment fodder. The jester bows dramatically, twirling before skipping off into the shadows. The line between justice and farce grows thinner. You pause to consider how stocks compare with your modern sense of justice. No trials by jury here, no long deliberations. Often, a lord's decree or the town court's quick judgment sealed the offender's fate. Sometimes fair, sometimes arbitrary. One merchant might be punished for false weights, while another escaped through bribes. Justice was as flexible as the hands that enforced it. The quirky note? Animals, too, occasionally found themselves in stocks. Chroniclers describe pigs punished for stealing crops, even goats tied for causing havoc. You laugh aloud, picturing a goat staring indignantly from wooden beams while villagers scolded it. Whether true or exaggerated, the image proves how creative justice could be. As the moon climbs high, silence falls heavier. The prisoners remain locked, shadows stretching long across the square. Their punishment doesn't end when the crowd leaves. It lingers, gnawing through fatigue and humiliation. You imagine the aches in their necks, the cramps in their legs, the humiliation replaying in their minds. Sleep offers no escape when your head is trapped between wood. A gentle drizzle begins, soaking their clothes, turning mud to sludge beneath their feet. You shiver, realizing how weather compounded misery. Punishment wasn't just about time served, it was about endurance. By morning, when the constable finally releases them, their shame will linger far longer than the bruises. Historians still argue whether stocks represented community justice or mob cruelty. Watching the night's events, you sense it was both. Justice in the Middle Ages wasn't about sterile courts or hidden punishments. It was public, noisy, often cruel, but also strangely communal. Everyone played a role, from jeering children to pitying women, from yawning constables to sly jesters. As you leave the square, you glance back one last time. The torches sputter in the rain, the prisoners slump in silence, and the wooden frames creak faintly in the wind. Justice here doesn't vanish with the crowd. It lingers, heavy and visible, carved into memory like names into stone. The square of shame lingers in your mind as you press onward, but soon the sound of dripping mud and the smell of damp earth pull you away from jeers and punishment. The night gives way to the pale light of dawn, and with it you find yourself on a road leading out of town. It's no Roman highway, no smooth cobbled path. Instead, it's a rut-riddled track, churned into sludge by cartwheels and hooves. Welcome to the medieval road system, or rather, the lack thereof. Tonight's journey becomes a trudge into the weary, dangerous, and often absurd reality of travel in a world where roads to nowhere feels less like a saying and more like lived experience. The first step you take nearly pulls your boot free. The mud clings greedily, and you realize why so many travelers walked barefoot or in simple wooden clogs. Horses sink to their fetlocks, carts tilt dangerously. A merchant curses loudly as one wheel wedges deep in a rut. His apprentices push with grunts and groans, their tunics streaked with muck. You lend a hand, shoving the cart free, and he nods thanks before warning you to guard your purse. Roads may connect towns, but they also connect thieves to their victims. Not 10 minutes later, you see proof of it. Two men in ragged cloaks lurk at the edge of the trees, their eyes scanning the path. One pretends to whittle a stick, the other scratches his beard, but their glances are too sharp. Bandits. Travelers clutch their cloaks tighter, moving quickly. A group of pilgrims bunch together, murmuring prayers as they shuffle past. Safety in numbers, they hope. You drift with them, aware that lone wanderers are ripe fruit for hungry hands. Historians still argue how frequent banditry really was, but out here, one glance is enough to make your heart beat faster. The pilgrims themselves fascinate you. Each carries a staff tipped with a shell or token, badges of their holy destination. Their cloaks are patched, their shoes worn thin, but their eyes shine with purpose. They sing softly, their voices blending into a kind of walking hymn. One woman tells you she's bound for Santiago, though it may take her months. Another dreams of Rome. Pilgrimage is more than travel. It's penance, adventure, and perhaps escape from debts. You imagine the miles stretching ahead of them, mud, danger, and hunger, and admire their stubborn faith. You stop at a wayside inn, though inn is generous. It's little more than a wooden hut with straw on the floor and ale that tastes like sour vinegar. The keeper scowls as he counts your coin, reminding you that food and shelter never come cheap to strangers. Inside, travelers cluster close to the hearth, a merchant tallying his wares, a soldier boasting of battles, a minstrel plucking tired notes. A boy sleeps against his mother, curled like a cat. The smell of damp wool and sweat hangs thick in the air. You're grateful for the roof, even if the fleas crawl faster than the fire warms. The quirky tidbit? Some inns charged by the blanket. Two guests might be expected to share the same bedding to save money. Privacy was non-existent, and theft was common. You sleep lightly, one hand on your pouch, half expecting to wake with fewer possessions, or fewer toes, if the fleas get ambitious. By dawn, you're back on the road. The ruts have frozen overnight, turning the mud into jagged ridges. Your feet stumble, your teeth chatter. A farmer trudges past, leading a cart piled high with hay. His oxen plod slowly, their breath steaming. He grumbles about tolls, about lords who charge for every bridge and gate. Travel isn't just hard, it's expensive. Toll booths dot the routes, coins demanded at every crossing. Historians still argue whether tolls improved road maintenance or just lined noble pockets. From the farmer's muttered curses, you know which answer he believes. Further along, you encounter a caravan of merchants. Their brightly painted wagons creak under the weight of cloth, spices, and wine. Guards walk alongside, spears in hand, eyes sharp. One merchant boasts that his convoy has traveled all the way from Flanders. He pats a bolt of fine cloth like it's treasure, which in truth it is. Trade moves along these rough tracks, fragile, yet vital. Without it, towns would starve, markets would wither, and guilds would collapse. Roads may be terrible, but they're lifelines nonetheless. Yet not all travelers are human. Ahead, you meet a drove of pigs herded by swineherds. The animals grunt and squeal, jostling each other down the path. They nose into puddles, splash mud, and occasionally break free, forcing the boys to chase them. You leap aside as one particularly large boar charges past, its snout dripping muck. Roads carried animals as much as people, geese to markets, sheep to new pastures, cattle to fairs. The journey always smelled, always brayed or clucked or squealed. The quirky detail? Some towns even had official pig routes to manage the chaos. You wonder if one day city planners drew maps with little squealing icons. You laugh to yourself before a swineherd shoots you a suspicious glance. As night falls, you trudge into a clearing where a group of travelers has built a fire. Bandits may haunt the woods, but fellowship offers safety. You sit among them, sharing stale bread and a sip of ale. Stories flow as easily as smoke. One man swears he saw a wolf larger than a horse. Another insists the last town cheated him on tolls. A woman boasts of reaching Paris in only 2 weeks. Historians still argue how fast medieval travel really was. Some claim 20 miles a day, others half that. Sitting here, your legs aching from just 10, you lean toward the slower side. The fire crackles, faces glow, and for a moment the road feels almost kind. But when the flames die, the cold rushes in. You wrap your cloak tighter, curling on the hard ground. Sleep comes, but fitfully. A twig snaps in the darkness, and everyone stiffens. Bandit? Wolf? The night is a constant gamble. Eventually, the sound fades and the camp relaxes, but you don't forget the jolt of fear. By morning, the road greets you again with mud and mist. A wooden bridge spans a sluggish river, its planks rotting, nails loose. A toll-keeper demands coin, his hut perched like a toad on the bank. You pay reluctantly, stepping gingerly as the bridge groans under your weight. Halfway across, a board shifts, and your stomach lurches. Somehow you reach the other side, promising yourself never to mock tolls again. At least the coins keep the bridge standing. As the day stretches, you pass shrines dotted along the road. Small stone crosses, candles flickering in niches, images of saints weathered by rain. Travelers pause, kneeling briefly, muttering prayers for safe passage. You kneel too, if only to rest your knees. Roads are dangerous, but shrines remind you that perhaps someone or something watches over weary feet. The quirky tidbit? Some shrines doubled as lost and found boards. Villagers left dropped purses or shoes in hopes the rightful owner passed by again. Faith and practicality, sharing the same shelf. By dusk, you crest a hill. Ahead lies another town, its spires poking above the mist, its gates promising warmth. You exhale in relief, though you know the cycle will repeat. More mud, more tolls, more danger. Medieval travel isn't about reaching swiftly. It's about enduring, one muddy, risky, exhausting mile at a time. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly felt isolated in their villages, or whether roads kept them more connected than we assume. Standing here, watching the endless track fade into trees, you realize both are true. Roads linked people, but they also reminded them how far apart their worlds really were. As you step through the gate, boots caked with muck, you think of all the feet that trudged these same paths: pilgrims, merchants, bandits, animals. Roads may feel like they lead nowhere, but they always lead to someone's story. And tonight, you've walked far enough to feel every rut carved into history itself. The muddy road dwindles behind you as night descends once more, and this time you follow the faint toll of bells drawing you toward a walled compound on the outskirts of town. The air is still, the torches dim, and every sound feels muffled, as if the world itself has lowered its voice. Tonight you step into a cloister, a monastery at midnight, where silence, chanting, and candlelight cradle weary souls in ritual. This is not the roar of feasts or the laughter of taverns. Here, everything slows, pared down to breath and prayer. The first thing you notice is the gate. Heavy wood reinforced with iron creaks as it swings inward. A hooded monk greets you with a nod, pressing a finger to his lips. No words, only silence. You step onto the flagstone path, your boots echoing faintly, and instantly feel out of place in a world where even footsteps seem too loud. Lanterns glow dimly in alcoves, their flames trembling in the draught. Beyond, the cloister arches frame a square courtyard, each stone glistening with dew. From the chapel comes chanting. A handful of monks stand in rows, their voices weaving into a low drone that vibrates in your chest. The sound is solemn, hypnotic, stretching each syllable like thread on a loom. You slip onto a bench at the back, letting the rhythm wash over you. The words are Latin, mostly incomprehensible, but the effect doesn't depend on understanding. It's about surrender, letting the chant pull your breath into its cadence. Historians still argue whether medieval worshippers truly grasped the liturgy or simply felt its emotional weight. Sitting here, your eyelids heavy, you know the latter suffices. The chapel itself is austere. Candles gutter on iron stands, their smoke curling upward. The scent of beeswax mingles with stone dampness. Carved saints peer down from niches, their eyes stern but not unkind. One monk coughs softly, breaking rhythm full, or a moment before sliding back into the chant. Another sways slightly, fighting drowsiness. You almost chuckle, realizing even the holiest among them struggle with midnight wakefulness. When the prayers end, the monks shuffle back into the cloister, heads bowed. You follow, keeping your steps quiet. Their sandals slap faintly against the stones. No one speaks. Silence is part of their vow, a discipline as strict as any sword drill. Yet the silence isn't empty. It hums with intention, like a harp string plucked and left to vibrate. You pass the dormitory, long rows of simple beds, each with a wool blanket neatly folded. A few brothers lie down, hands crossed over chests, drifting quickly into sleep before the next bell summons them. Privacy is non-existent, but peace is abundant. The room smells faintly of straw and soap, cleaner than most peasant huts. You imagine the monks rising before dawn, bleary-eyed yet ready for prayer, bread, and work. Through another archway, you enter the scriptorium. Candles flicker over wooden desks, where manuscripts lie open, Bibles, medical treatises, even collections of classical texts. Quills scratch as a few monks continue copying, their concentration unbroken by the hour. You watch one trace a golden initial with painstaking care, his tongue poking out slightly in focus. The pages glow like treasure under candlelight. These men preserve knowledge word by word, stroke by stroke. The quirky detail? Some scribes doodled in margins, tiny rabbits jousting with snails, monks playing bagpipes, jokes hidden among sacred texts. You lean closer, spotting a tiny drawing of a dog chasing a goose, and grin despite yourself. Even solemnity needs an outlet. You wander into the refectory, long, empty tables waiting for morning. A single loaf of bread sits wrapped in cloth, tomorrow's first meal. Meals here are plain, bread, beans, maybe fish en fades. Past days. Meat is rare, indulgence rarer still. Yet the simplicity isn't punishment, it's rhythm. Eat to live, pray to focus, copy to preserve. Every act is deliberate. You picture monks sitting in silence, one reading aloud from scripture, while the others chew slowly, their minds fed alongside their stomachs. Past the kitchen, you step into the garden. Moonlight spills over neat rows of herbs, sage, fennel, lavender. The air is sharp with fragrance. This is no mere decoration, it's pharmacy. Monks used these herbs to brew remedies for villagers, teas for fever, salves for wounds, poultices for coughs. Healing and holiness intertwined here, sometimes with real success, sometimes with hopeful superstition. You brush a leaf between your fingers, its scent strong enough to clear your nose. Historians still argue whether monasteries were centers of effective medicine or simply sanctuaries of trial and error. Standing here, the dew cold on your hands, you feel both are true. The quiet deepens as you walk the cloister's covered walkways. Your breath echoes softly. In one corner, a monk kneels before a candle, whispering prayers despite the vow of silence. You realize silence wasn't absence, it was choice. Words, when spoken, mattered more. The discipline shapes even thought, training the mind as the body bends to the bell. You find yourself growing calmer, slower. Your shoulders drop, your steps soften. It's as though the stones themselves exhale, urging you to breathe with them. The chaos of markets, the clang of swords, the jeers of stocks, all fade. Here, only the drip of water from a fountain, the flicker of flame, and the soft murmur of chant linger. And yet, monasteries weren't only havens. Beyond the silence, politics thrived. Lands owned, rents collected, disputes with lords simmering, wealth accumulated in golden chalices and illuminated texts. Quirky tidbit. Some abbots dined like nobles, feasting richly while their monks ate bread and beans. Hypocrisy thrived alongside holiness. Historians still argue whether monasteries embodied pure devotion or simply another form of medieval power. The truth, as always, lies in the messy middle. Still, as you sit by the fountain, you feel gratitude for this moment of quiet. The world outside teems with noise and fear. Inside, you hear only the steady breath of men who gave their lives to silence. You close your eyes, letting candlelight flicker against your lids, your body sinking into the rhythm. The bell tolls again, softer now. The monks file back into the chapel, voices rising once more. You watch them disappear, their shadows stretching long against stone. You linger, savoring the hush, the glow, the rare sense of peace. Midnight in the cloister is not just a time, it's a place, a pause in history where even the busiest heart slows. Your own breath steadies, your own eyelids grow heavy. You realize this is the perfect place to end your wandering, for now. And so, as the last candle gutters in the cloister, your journey through medieval nights draws to a gentle close. You've walked torchlit streets where pigs snorted in shadows, chewed coarse bread under watchful eyes, shivered in creaking castles, bargained at rowdy markets, prayed in incense-thick chapels, sweated under armor, and laughed at feasts that left more indigestion than glamour. You've tiptoed past plague houses, listened to witchcraft whispers, scratched at straw beds, felt war drums rattle your chest, and peered nervously into a surgeon's bloody hands. You've swayed to lutes and bagpipes, watched guild secrets hammered into stone and dyed into cloth, followed minstrels weaving gossip into songs, danced in firelit festivals, and marveled at pets both loyal and absurd. You've winced at justice in the stocks, trudged along roads that led everywhere and nowhere, and finally stepped into the cloister's midnight hush. Now let those images blur and soften. Imagine the bonfire's sparks fading into distant stars. Picture the crowded market stalls dissolving into quiet lanes. Hear the clash of swords dim until only the steady rhythm of your own breathing remains. The monk's chant lingers faintly, like a lullaby without words, carrying you deeper into calm. The night is no longer filled with shouts, bells, or drums. It is filled only with the hush of your pillow, the warmth of your blanket, and the promise of rest. You are safe, still, cradled in the long echo of history. Let your eyelids fall, let your thoughts drift, and allow yourself to be carried gently into sleep.